Chapter 1. The last time I visited Uncle Jed, the summer before 7th grade, I didn't know he was already dead, in more ways than one. You know, Jason, Dad glanced at me in the rearview mirror of our family's big black Buick, Mom sitting beside him in the passenger seat. They looked more like siblings than a married couple, thick, brown hair, short, frumpy bodies. I wasn't really sure where I got my own tall, strongly built frame and spiky black hair from. I'm really glad you're staying with your uncle for the next few days while he's going through this incredibly difficult time. I've been looking out my backseat window the whole 2 hours since we'd left home, the rolling Minnesota countryside alternating between long stretches of forest and farmland. Sometimes a rickety wooden farmhouse or barn passed by too, but it was tough to tell because of the terribly overcast day. Everything mostly blended together in mute shades of gray, like we were in a horror movie or something, which was kind of a shame because the countryside was absolutely gorgeous this time of year. Yes, I might have been only 12 years old, but I could appreciate a rustic countryside. Rain constantly pattered against the windows, the extremely slow, monotonous kind that kept threatening to lull me to sleep. Looking back, I kinda wished it had, and that it kept me asleep for the next 72 hours straight. I snapped upright in my seat at Dad's statement, tried to rub the grogginess from my eyes. Oh right, yeah, he could probably use some family right about now. You better believe it. Dad chewed his lower lip, his brown eyes dimming a bit. Poor guy hasn't even answered any of my calls since the funeral. He only confirmed your visit over text. But if I know good old Uncle Jed, and I know you do too, he's as tough as a bed of nails lying on top of a bed of nails. He'll get through this. He'll get through this just fine. Famous last words. But I said, yeah, true. It was really an awful shame what happened, and it was hard not to dwell on it on the way to visit my uncle. Just a few weeks ago, his wife, my Aunt Eleanor, had passed away. She'd been 84, 9 years older than him, and the love of his life. The whole family had been rocked by her death, as she'd been such a sweet, beloved lady and nobody saw it coming. She was simply here one minute, gone the next. From a stroke, apparently. But the first real sign something was more horribly off than I could have ever imagined was soon as Dad turned the Buick onto Uncle Jed's driveway. Even though it was hard to see between the nonstop sheets of rain slamming down from the heavens, Uncle Jed's skinny, towering figure clearly wasn't standing on his wraparound porch like it always was when I arrived. Ever since I could remember, he'd always stood there and waited for me. And he'd done it when it rained too, because the porch had a roof. Plus it wasn't windy today, so he didn't have to worry about the rain blowing into him from the sides either. I was about to mention this odd, maybe even disturbing fact to Mom and Dad, when Dad swung the Buick right up to the porch so fast I caught my breath. He angled the car as he did so, my side faced the porch, then popped the trunk. I'd gun it if I were you, Jason, he said. And we'd come in and say hi, but we're cutting it close as it is, and traffic's probably going to be pretty crazy around the airport. We don't want to miss our flight. Yeah, what else was new? Mom and Dad were always cutting it close, or just flat out running late. It was actually surprising they hadn't missed a single flight to date yet. Right. I really should have brought an umbrella. But I guess no one thought to check the forecast before we left. So I did as Dad suggested, bolted as fast as humanly possible from the car, slammed the car door shut, yanked my suitcase out of the trunk, and darted up to the front stoop and safely beneath the roof. Thankfully, I didn't get nearly as drenched as I thought I would. I guess the rain wasn't as heavy as it looked. Say hi to Uncle Jed for us, Dad called through Mom's halfway lowered passenger side window as he pulled the Buick away from the house. Dad was in his early 50s, a good 20 or so years younger than Uncle Jed. A pretty big gap, I know, especially considering they were both my grandparents' only 2 kids. "We love you, sweetie," Mom called. "I love you too," I called back. The thick black car wove along the narrow, pebbly driveway and past the stone cross jutting out from the grassy earth midway along it off to the side. Huh? What was a cross doing there? I was pretty sure it had never been there before, and I was also pretty sure Uncle Jed wasn't religious. At least, I'd never heard him talk about religion before. Odd. Brushing the thought away, I continued to watch the Buick mosey down the narrow country lane and eventually vanished into the rain. I didn't know what it was exactly. Maybe it was the fact it was pouring like it was Earth's very last chance to. Or maybe it was the fact Uncle Jed wasn't out on the porch like he always was, wearing his large, somewhat goofy straw hat and cunning smile. But whatever it was, a hole carved into me, long and deep and black. I missed Mom and Dad already. I missed them so much, and I usually didn't when they dropped me off at Uncle Jed's. Now, don't get me wrong, I loved my parents and all, but hanging out with Uncle Jed for a few days was always such a blast. A lot of times, I didn't even want to go back home when Mom and Dad came to pick me up. But this time already felt different. I slowly turned around and faced the closed wooden front door. Not exactly a warm welcome. A pocket of cold wafted through me as if a ghost just brushed past, and I shivered. Where was Uncle Jed? Even if he wasn't out here, he should have heard the car on the drive. Plus, he knew I was coming. I raised a fist and gently knocked on the door. Nothing but silence. No shuffling of footsteps or any kind of sound came from inside the house. Weird. I rang the doorbell and knocked a little harder. "Hello? Uncle Jed?" Finally, a light shuffle came from inside, and the door creaked open a tiny bit. Uncle Jed's pale, wrinkly face peeked through the crack, and I could barely make out his usual plaid button-down shirt and overalls. His eyes were as blank as a fake shotgun's bullets, his forehead crinkling even more as he took me in. "Hello? May I help you, young man?" Chapter 2. Uncle Jed? It's me. Seriously, how could he not recognize me? I mean, it was an extremely downcast day and I might have been dripping with rain and all, but still. He continued to stare at me with those eerily vacant eyes, his straw-thin lips crinkling up now, too. "Uncle Jed, it's me, Jason, your nephew." He continued to eye me a bit longer, the seconds slowly rolling by. Seriously, what was up with this guy? I mean, this was totally crazy. I was about to open the door myself so we could get a closer look when he threw back his head and let out a loud, long, throaty laugh. "Why, of course I recognize my favorite nephew in the whole entire universe." Well, I was his only nephew, but I still appreciated the sentiment. "How have you been doing, old boy? It's so great to see you. Please, come on in, come on in." He wrenched the door totally open. Old boy? He'd never called me that before. In fact, if anything, he usually called me young fella. Still, I let out a chuckle as I pushed past him into the house. Thank God he was just joking. A classic Uncle Jed joke. How did I not see that coming? Seriously, I should have seen it all the way from my hometown, Norton, Minnesota. Yeesh, I must have been more tightly wound than I thought. It had definitely been a weird start to my annual summer visit. Then I noticed I was dripping on the fuzzy doormat, which had the phrase, "Home Sweet Jedediah," Uncle Jed's full name, stitched on it. He had a weird sense of humor, but I found it kind of endearing. "Oh, crud," I muttered. "No worries, old boy. That's what it's there for, after all. Here, let me get that jacket for you." Seriously, that phrase was sounding weirder and weirder on his tongue the more he said it. I took off my jacket and he placed it into the closet while I dried my shoes on the mat. As I did, I took a quick look around. So far, the place looked exactly the same as always, which was a good thing, I guessed. An elegant brass chandelier hung from the foyer ceiling. A wooden staircase complete with a thick, shiny banister headed up the second floor on the left, and straight ahead stretched a wide hall that led to the kitchen and a living room. A tall oak grandfather clock sat against the wall midway along the hall, ticking away.
"It's so great to see you, old boy."
I held back a cringe at the phrase as he extended a hand. Huh? A handshake? Uncle Jed never shook hands. Well, not with me, anyway. He either gave me a good clap on the shoulder or wrapped an arm around both of them and brought me in for a short half-hug. But no, never a handshake. Come to think of it, I'd never seen him shake Dad's or any other man's hand either. You too, Uncle Jed. I reached my hand out, but as soon as I touched his, he yanked it away, his whole body jerking back a bit. His lips parted slightly, and his eyes wedged a bit wider as he stared at my hand. What? I whipped my gaze back down at my hand, too. What's wrong? Chapter 3. But nothing appeared to be wrong with my hand. I even feverishly rotated it a few times just to be sure. Uncle Jed's facial features softened, and he cracked a smile, though something about it seemed off.
"Sorry, so sorry about that, old boy. I must have scared the absolute living bat crud out of you. I honestly don't know what came over me there. Senior moment, I guess you could say."
He let out a light chuckle, but it was even more unnatural than his smile. Uncle Jed, that wasn't nothing. I put both my hands on my hips. Seriously, what's wrong? Is everything all right? I mean, I figured he was still grieving over Aunt Eleanor's death, but that didn't explain all this bizarre behavior. Right?
"Oh, everything is completely fine, old boy, completely fine."
Uncle Jed! A rueful smile crossed his face.
"All right, well, to be completely honest, it's just that. It's just that you have so much energy. So much pure, raw energy. I can just kind of feel it, you know?"
Huh? Energy? What in the flaming gates of heck was Uncle Jed talking about now? He must have seen the totally baffled expression on my face because he said,
"Oh, don't worry, old boy, it's a wonderful thing. Heck, a young boy like yourself should have a lot of energy. Lots and lots of it. Do you a lot of good energy, it certainly does."
Okay. Seriously, this conversation was just getting weirder and weirder and creepier. This whole visit was, really. What had Aunt Eleanor's death done to my poor Uncle Jed? I was starting to really hope he was going to be okay.
"Now," he said, "how about you drop your suitcase off in the guest room and join me in the parlor for some tea?"
He gestured toward the parlor off in the foyer as if I didn't know where it was. Also weird. And that wasn't all. Uncle Jed never called my room upstairs the guest room. He just called it my room since I stayed in it every time I visited ever since I could remember. Plus tea? He never drank tea. That had been Aunt Eleanor's thing. He drank cappuccino while I always had a mug of hot chocolate. Okay. I headed up the creaky stairs and went into the first room on the right at the top of the landing, still wondering what was up with Uncle Jed. My room looked as if it hadn't been touched since the last time I was there, and it probably hadn't been, because Uncle Jed and Aunt Eleanor didn't have any kids, and hardly ever had any visitors. It was a nice room, though, large and spacious, with a 4-poster bed, a black iron stove in the corner that was really more for looks than providing heat, and a dark blue wool rug in the middle of the floor. Cozy, really. I placed my suitcase by the dresser opposite the bed, put my hands on my hips again, and heaved a deep sigh. Despite how odd Uncle Jed was acting so far, it was good to be back. This house, and especially this room, felt like a piece of home to me. Always had, and hopefully always would. I then headed back downstairs into the parlor. I'd unpack and put all my clothes into the dresser and hook up my video game system in the living room later, as usual. The parlor was also exactly as I remembered it. Surrounding a small wooden table were two huge, comfy armchairs you could sink right into, and an elegant white sofa that clearly came from Aunt Eleanor's much wealthier side of the family. She had inherited a ton from her parents, and although she and Uncle Jed met in the suburbs, they eventually moved to the countryside for the rustic scenery, as they'd put it. A massive stone fireplace filled up most of the far wall, too, where a light fire brewed. I'd learned the flames couldn't get any bigger than that, though, since it was an electric fireplace and, like the stove in my room, more for looks than creating heat. On the mantelpiece stood an old photograph of Uncle Jed and Aunt Eleanor smiling and holding hands in their backyard. Rows of cornfields stretched behind them, the hulking oak tree complete with rope swing on their right. Everything looked so bright, happy, and peaceful in the photo, so much the opposite of all the rain today and the lingering fact Aunt Eleanor was no longer with us. Still, I guess there was nothing wrong with keeping photos of her around the house. Hopefully soon they'd bring a nostalgic warmth to Uncle Jed's heart whenever he laid his eyes on them, instead of the intense grief he'd clearly been feeling for a few weeks now. Poor guy. Looking at the old photo made my own heart ache too, since I also missed Aunt Eleanor a ton. I missed her kind, sweet-hearted nature, how she always asked how Mom, Dad, school, and my friends were, even how she always smelled like one of the beautiful lilacs in the small garden out back. But at least she'd lived a nice, long, happy life and was at peace now. As I sat on one of the armchairs, I couldn't help but notice the small TV on the wall opposite the sofa was on, displaying the news. I murmured out loud this time. The cushion was so soft like it always was. Uncle Jed chuckled as he came into the room carrying a tray with Aunt Eleanor's teapot and two of her teacups, like how she used to, though usually the trays also held Uncle Jed's cappuccino and my hot chocolate mugs. The mugs were both big and black, the total opposite of the dainty teacups and pot, which were white and sported little painted roses on them. "Nice and comfy, eh?" he asked. I nodded. He placed the tray on the table, poured tea into both cups, light steam drifted from them, and pushed one toward my end of the table. Then he picked up his own cup and sank into the armchair opposite me. "Yep, that's the life, all right. Am I right or am I right, old boy?" Definitely. Though I had to admit it was weird sitting in the parlor without Aunt Eleanor. Her usual spot on the sofa was noticeably empty, and a sharp chill wafted through me. Uncle Jed took a sip of his tea, so I did too. It burnt my tongue a little, but had a nice honeyish flavor. Not bad at all, although I would still much rather have my hot chocolate. But I'm a bit surprised, Uncle Jed. He leaned back farther into his chair, crossing his legs, still holding his cup. What the? Why was he crossing his legs? I'd never seen him do that before. It looked almost feminine, sort of like how Aunt Eleanor used to when she had her tea. Seriously, what was going on with him? "Why is that, old boy?" Well, I tried not to focus on his legs, but it was hard not to. He must have caught me noticing because his lips and chin suddenly trembled a bit as he quickly uncrossed them. "Try to smooth over the whole awkward thing," I said. Because Aunt Eleanor was always the big tea drinker around here. I immediately regretted saying it. Probably shouldn't have brought her up at all, even though Uncle Jed was drinking tea and crossing his legs like her. Probably his subconscious way of showing how much he missed her. I mean, What happened to the cappuccino you always used to have? And what about my hot chocolate? The same expression as before attacked Uncle Jed's face. Lips slightly parted, eyes a bit wide.
Yes, that's a good question, old boy. Good questions. I guess I should say.
He let out what sounded like a strained chuckle.
And well, to be quite frank, I figured today we might as well have had some of her lovely tea. You know, in honor and memory of...
He cast a glance at the photograph above the mantel, though instead of turning a bit bleary like I expected, his eyes stayed crisp.
Well, her.
Oh, okay, yeah. I think that's a great idea. A little strange, no doubt, but not a totally bad sentiment, I guessed. I took another sip. Thankfully, it didn't burn as badly this time. I know I told you at the funeral, Uncle Jed, but I'm really sorry about that. You know, her passing. She really was such an amazing person, and an awesome aunt. I loved her a megaton, and I'm really sad she's gone. We all are, of course. He nodded.
Yeah, I know. And thank you so much for saying so, Jason. It really means a lot to me, and, well, like I said, having some of her tea...
He lifted his cup a bit in the air.
It just makes me feel like I'm still connected to her in some way, you know?
Again, his eyes stayed as crisp as ever. I nodded hard. Yeah, I get what you mean, and I personally believe you are. He smiled, though once again something about it didn't feel quite right.
Thank you, Jason.
There was a brief silence as we each took another sip, and a snag of news from the TV filtered into my ears.
I just don't get it, a woman's voice sobbed. Who would do such an utterly dreadful thing? It's just so horrible.
I shifted my attention to the TV. As expected, a woman was currently displayed on it. She was middle-aged, wore a flowery violet dress, and stood on the front porch of what looked like a very upscale home made of crisp white stone complete with columns. The front door was constructed of what appeared to be some kind of rich wood, with frosty, vertical windows framing its sides. A newsman stood next to the woman, holding a microphone up to her mouth, the phrase, "Local breaking news," continually running along the bottom of the screen. Local, eh? I didn't know anyone around here had a house that nice since this town was pretty far out in the sticks, but it looked like there was an exception somewhere.
I mean,
the woman said to the newsman, tears gleaming on her red-tinted cheeks,
to sneak into the house of a 12-year-old girl who died just 2 weeks ago and steal her favorite teddy bear, it's just wrong. Horribly, horribly wrong. Seriously, who would do such an atrocious, despicable thing? And why?
The newscaster just shrugged, still holding the mic up to her mouth.
Really, she said. The teddy bear hardly even has a monetary value. It's just a stupid stuffed animal. It's just a bleep, stupid stuffed animal.
She turned her attention to the camera, her face morphing a deep scarlet now.
Whoever did this, whatever incredibly foul piece of bleep did this utterly wretched thing, you listen to me right now. You are the biggest piece of bleep in existence, and you're going straight to hell. You hear me? Straight to hell! Seriously, you don't think we've suffered enough? Don't you think me and my beloved husband had suffered enough with the bleeps? Your loss of our bleep daughter to have to bleep endure something bleep like this?
The screen then cut to a newsroom where a woman and man in suits sat at a counter with the Daily News Station 7 logo in the background. The man shook his head.
Terrible. Just terrible.
A light scrambling sound came from Uncle Jed's seat, but I couldn't rip my attention from the TV.
It really is, the woman said. I think I speak for all of us here at Daily News 7 when I say my heart goes out to that poor woman and her husband. I mean, it's awful enough to lose your beloved daughter in a terrible tragedy, but someone breaking into your house and stealing her most beloved possession on top of that. It's just disgusting. More than an insult to injury, if you ask me." "No doubt about it, Meg. And still no word on the culprit either. Apparently whoever did it broke the only window in the house not under surveillance by a camera while the parents were out and stole the teddy bear before the police could respond to the alarm going off." "Right. It's almost as if whoever did it knew." The TV went dark and I shot my gaze at Uncle Jed, who was holding the remote with a slightly shaking hand, his own eyes red and bleary. Crud. Definitely not the best thing for him to see after losing the person he loved the most in this world himself. He must have been just scrambling for the remote, which had probably slipped up between the cushion and the chair or something. He shook his head as he placed the remote on the table. "There are some sick people in this world, Jason. Some really sick people." All I could do was nod. Definitely couldn't argue with that. Still, I couldn't get my mind off the news story. I wanted to ask Uncle Jed if he knew anything more about it, but figured that was a bad idea at this point. Oh well. He leaned back in his seat and started to cross his legs again, but stopped himself this time. "So, Jason, I have an extremely important question to ask you. One of utmost importance I've been meaning to ask you for a while now, actually." Oh, really? My heart started to thump hard in my chest, a chill slithering along my arms and legs. Based on how this visit was going so far, and his suddenly cold, rigid expression as he bore his gaze into mine, I had the feeling I wasn't going to like what his question was. Not the tiniest bit. Chapter 4. "How often do you go to church?" Uncle Jed asked. Huh? What? The word just popped out. That was the absolute last thing I expected him to ask. I was pretty sure he never asked me that before. Actually, come to think of it, I was pretty sure no one had ever asked me that before. "How often do you go to church, young man?" A little different than old boy, but I was honestly happy for the change. I looked up at the white ceiling, focusing on the corners where the drywall met a wooden beam that bordered it. Then I looked back at him. Well, I don't go to church at all, actually. I had to admit, I wasn't really a religious guy. Neither were Mom and Dad, which might have been why I wasn't either. They both grew up in devout Catholic families, which explained why Dad's name was Joseph and Uncle Jed's was Jedediah, but I had never gone to church with them, and they never asked me religious questions or anything before. I see. Uncle Jed pursed his thin, colorless lips. "How often do you pray or speak to God, then?" Another question no one had ever asked me before, even my own friends. This time I tried to keep my gaze on him, but it was hard under his sharp, penetrating stare. Well, hardly ever, to be honest, Uncle Jed. I didn't want to say I was pretty sure I had never in my entire 12 years of life. For some reason, it felt like a bad idea just then. He nodded as he closed his eyes, and a quiver rippled along my spine. This was turning into yet another incredibly bizarre and eerie conversation with Uncle Jed. Not something I wanted to be a part of. I desperately racked my brain for some way to change the topic, but I couldn't think of anything. After what I felt was a full ice age drifted by, he opened his eyes again. "I'm glad you were able to be honest with me, Jason." Huh? I swore that word seemed to keep spiraling through my brain. Of course, Uncle Jed. I'm always honest with you, you know that. For the most part, really. Well, when it mattered anyway. Another brief silence wafted by, his gaze trained on me the entire time. "I'm afraid I can't quite believe that, Jason." It felt as he just lunged forward and stabbed my heart with a pointy-edged cross. How could he say something like that? How could my very own Uncle Jed, who'd I'd known and loved my entire life, who I pretty much always told the truth to, possibly say something like that about me?
and to my face. I was at a total and utter loss for words. He leaned in slowly and placed his teacup on the table, light steam still drifting from it. His eyes glittered like a pair of marbles caught in the sun, something I'd never seen on his face before, as he gazed even more penetratingly at me. It made what felt like a siege of sharp-nailed fingers gently prod all along my back and spine over and over again. "Why is that, Uncle Jed?" I finally managed to ask, though I really wasn't so sure I wanted to know the answer. My throat suddenly felt terribly dry, a hitch forming in it, so I took another sip of tea.
"Because I've been speaking with God lately. A lot more than usual, in fact. You know, ever since my wife passed away."
Despite the already incredibly strange conversation, it seemed odd he used the phrase, "my wife," instead of calling her by her name. I shakily put my cup back on the table. Hopefully Uncle Jed didn't notice the tremor. "Ah, I see." This sort of did make sense, though. Ever though I never knew Uncle Jed to speak to God, it was understandable for grief to drive him to do so.
"And he's told me some things about you, Jason. Some very unsettling things."
Oh, crud, this couldn't be good. Not in the slightest bit. The sharp-nailed fingers raked along my back and spine again, harder this time, and another hitch replaced the first one in my throat. Like what? But once again, I didn't really want to know the answer.
"Well, like you just admitted, he said you don't talk to him enough, not nearly enough, and he said you need to pray and attend church far more often than you currently do. He's very worried about you, Jason. Very, very worried. And therefore, so am I."
Yet another brief silence hung in the room as I let that disturbing information settle into my mind. But why exactly? I mean, okay, I don't pray or go to church much, but I haven't done anything wrong. Honestly, at least not in a very long time. I've been a good boy, I swear, Uncle Jed. A very, very good boy. You and God should be proud of me. Then it hit me. Oh, bat crud. Does this all have to do with how I let a tarantula loose in my best friend Jeremy's locker a few months ago? I didn't mean to scare him so much, Uncle Jed. I really didn't. I mean, I didn't know he was that terrified of spiders. Really. I just knew he had a bit of a phobia, and sometimes we play practical jokes on each other every once in a while. Just little harmless ones to frighten each other a bit here and there. Such big horror buffs like us love that type of stuff, after all. I knew Uncle Jed could relate to that, too, being a horror buff himself. But he let out a light sigh as he started to cross his legs again, but stopped himself again.
"I'm honestly not sure what the reason is, Jason, but I do know that until you start doing all those things I just mentioned..."
His face suddenly went rigid as iron, his eyes totally blank as if staring past me into outer space.
"Actually, I'm afraid it might already be too late."
Huh? What? What do you mean it might already be too late? My heart was starting to beat so hard it felt like it was actually thudding against my rib cage. He was seriously freaking me out now. Like seriously. But he just kept gazing past me, those eerie, empty eyes. "Uncle Jed," I practically cried, "what do you mean it might already be too late?"
Chapter 5. "Well," Uncle Jed said, "what I mean is it may not matter at all what you do now. Apparently, from what I understand, God's patience has officially run thin with you, Jason. Completely. And perhaps forever."
What? Really? That couldn't possibly be true, right? I mean, sure, I didn't know God very well, or at all, really, but if possible, Uncle Jed's eyes seemed to grow even emptier, his whole body as rigid as the grandfather clock out in the hallway.
"Not only that,
I get the sense something terrible is about to happen. To not just you, but perhaps our entire family."
Huh? What? Nausea slithered through my stomach, gradually thickening and spreading throughout it. This was totally crazy and horrifying. And if it was true, if God really was totally fed up with me and was about to make something terrible happen to me or my family. And then it all clicked. Everything, like a couple of puzzle pieces, just slipped right into their spots, solving the whole insane thing. Nope. There was absolutely no doubt about it. Uncle Jed had gone totally, completely, and unequivocally bat-crud crazy. There was just no other explanation. This man sitting right in front of me just plain wasn't himself anymore. He was gone. Totally and utterly gone. And in his place was a poor, crazy shell of a man inventing and spouting all kinds of nonsense. And it was probably all because of Aunt Eleanor's death. It must have rocked him so badly he literally mentally snapped. Like completely and totally mentally snapped. Ugh, it was so awful. Just so awful to see him in such a lost, horrific state, so hopelessly consumed with grief. I said, "Well, I'm sorry to hear that, Uncle Jed. I really am. And thanks so much for telling me. I really appreciate it. And I swear I'll try to make my absolute hardest to do all those things you just mentioned that have to do with God anyway, as soon as possible. And hopefully everything will wind up being okay. Okay?" I figured my best bet was to try to calm him down, as truly insane as he seemed and probably was at the moment. Just get him to relax a bit, feel better, even if it was short-lived. He took a big, long breath, then picked up his teacup and took another sip. "Good. I'm glad you're taking this seriously, Jason. And I hope, no, I pray, you're right, for both our sakes and our families." He took a long final sip, draining his cup, then put it down. "Now why don't you go ahead and unpack? I think it's about time you got yourself settled in, don't you?" And just like that, back to a more normal conversation, as if we just hadn't talked about God being terribly upset with me and wanting to cast tragedy on our family. "Oh yeah, sure, Uncle Jed." I finished my tea too, and headed upstairs to my room, breathing an inward sigh of relief. Yeesh, glad that was over. I couldn't help but hope with all my being he would get through this incredibly terrible time, though. That soon enough he'd turn back to the fun, happy, and, yes, sane Uncle Jed I knew and loved all my life. I neatly placed my folded clothes in the dresser, the new horror book I bought recently on top of it, and my toiletry bag beneath the sink in the little bathroom attached to my room. Then I headed back downstairs to hook up my PlayStation in the living room since the TV there was way bigger than the one in the parlor. Whoa! I stopped at the threshold, the PlayStation and controllers in my arms. Uncle Jed had seriously upgraded since I was here last. He had a much bigger TV now with what looked like all the latest streaming devices. Sweet! We shouldn't have any problems finding any horror movies or TV shows, or any movies or TV shows for that matter we wanted to watch later. And this was seriously awesome for playing video games on too. I couldn't wait. When I got the system all hooked up, I glanced at my cell phone. There was still an hour or so to kill before dinner, so I booted up Zombie Bloodfest 4 and started shooting all the heads off the zombies on a huge, crisp screen, laughing gleefully as I did. There was just something so satisfying about beheading the undead with handguns, shotguns, and chainsaws. Well, anything really, especially on such an awesome TV. "What in the world?" Uncle Jed cried as he bustled into the room. "What in God's name is all that dreadful noise?" I laughed. "Just Zombie Bloodfest 4. Want to play?" Uncle Jed and I had countless classic gaming episodes over the years.
He usually played with me, but sometimes just watched while he ate a bagel or drank his cappuccino. Unfortunately, Aunt Eleanor had hated video games, especially violent ones, so she would leave the room if we were ever playing one. Just thinking about her made a curtain of sadness waft against me. It was really such a shame she was no longer with us.
"What?" he asked. "No, turn that utterly wretched thing off right this moment."
I laughed. "Come on, grab the other controller and join me, Uncle Jed. We'll play the regular campaign on hard mode this time."
"I'm serious, Jason. Turn that horrific piece of crud off right this second."
"What?" I paused the game. "But you love this game, Uncle Jed." That same expression that had struck his face a couple times before, the slightly parted lips and widened eyes, appeared yet again, then quickly vanished.
"Well, not anymore. Like I told you, I'd become closer to God lately, Jason. Much closer. And he doesn't condone video games. At all. Especially violent ones."
"What? Really?" He nodded feverishly.
"He says they're loud and obnoxious and sometimes even spark real violence in the real world."
Whoa, that was quite definitely not what I expected to hear, and something didn't quite seem right about that either. But I thought they were just kind of a form of entertainment, like any other genre like comedy or romance, and I thought there was no firm evidence they lead to actual violence or anything. I was pretty sure I even read somewhere that violent video games might have been even healthy for people since they're a non-violent way of letting out and working through emotions like anger and grief and whatnot. Actually, playing Zombie Bloodfest 4 might have been perfect for Uncle Jed just then. What better way to get over the loss of a loved one than pointless, nonstop, undead carnage? Plus, in the back of my mind, I couldn't help but wonder why Uncle Jed was talking to God about video games of all things. Definitely kind of weird.
"Well, that is simply incorrect," he said. "And even more so, I have to say I am utterly appalled and horrified you would even question God's word, Jason."
"What?"
"He's God, Jason. He knows everything about everything, including video games. And these dreadful, awful, violent video games are not good for anyone in the slightest bit. So please turn them off right this very moment."
"Okay, sure, Uncle Jed." And it was an it, not them. But I wasn't about to argue the point. As I maneuvered to the off function on the screen using my controller, Uncle Jed said,
"I'm afraid this is also precisely what I was talking about earlier, Jason. Playing these incredibly dreadful things and ignoring God's word. Those are both strong signs that you're not nearly close enough to him, as he's been telling me. Do you understand what I'm trying to tell you, young man?"
I pulled the PlayStation wires out the back of the TV and wrapped them around the system itself. Great. That was one form of entertainment I couldn't indulge in this week. Hopefully I still had enough to hold me over, especially when Uncle Jed was off doing his own thing. Yes, of course, Uncle Jed. I'll try to pray and talk to God more, and as soon as possible, like I said, I promise.
"Good. And might I say, there is never a better time than the present."
He glanced at his silver watch on his wrinkly wrist, then quirked an eyebrow at me.
"Why don't you go ahead and give it a try right now for a few minutes while I heat up dinner? Go on and try and talk to him."
"Wait, we're eating now?"
"Well, in about 5 minutes. That's how long it takes to heat up the frozen lasagna."
"What? Lasagna? Uncle Jed always ate a dinner at 6 o'clock sharp, and he always made his world-famous chili cheese dogs the first night of my visit, sometimes a couple nights during my visit. And well, I've been really looking forward to them, even though they weren't actually world-famous, of course. But I didn't bother mentioning any of those things to Uncle Jed,
Unfortunately, it didn't seem to matter at all at this point. Okay, I said, trying my hardest not to show my disappointment. Not sure if I was successful, though. Sounds good, Uncle Jed. Excellent. Now there's a good boy. And he disappeared into the hall. Yeesh. What had that been all about? Seriously, this visit was just getting more and more insane and was even starting to drive me a bit nuts myself. But the more I thought about it, the more I couldn't help but feel sorry for Uncle Jed. This was all because of Aunt Eleanor's tragic death. I mean, it had to be, right? I sat on the sofa and gazed at the blank TV. Well, maybe I should talk to God a bit. Sure, I'd never done it before, and I wasn't really sure I believed in anything Uncle Jed said because of his clearly frazzled mental state. But Lord knew, no pun intended, a lot of things were off here today. Plus, it definitely couldn't hurt, right? I adjusted my legs into Indian-style position because I definitely wasn't going to cross them, closed my eyes, and took a deep breath. Here goes.
Chapter 6.
Dear God, it's me, Jason. Jason Hardwick. Well, you probably know that already. I mean, you're God, right? I inwardly chuckled. How stupid could I be? Anyway, how are you doing today? Are you listening to me right now? No response. Just silence. Pure darkness surrounding my vision. A needling feeling pricked my gut. Was God supposed to answer? How was I supposed to know if he was listening if he didn't answer any of my questions? How did this whole talking to God thing actually work? Even though I hadn't a single clue, I pushed forward anyway. God? I just wanted to say I hope you're not mad at me. I mean, I know I'm not the most perfect kid in the world, but I mean well. Well, I definitely try to be good anyway. And that thing with the tarantula that happened with Jeremy Lacosta last year? I didn't mean to scare him so much, I swear. We just like to scare each other from time to time. You know, for fun. And he does it to me sometimes too, and I get a kick out of it. Really, I do. So please don't punish me, God, or him for that matter. Anyway, Uncle Jed said I don't talk to you enough, so here I am. I hope everything's good with you. Things are pretty good with me in general, but I have to say, when it comes to Uncle Jed right now, I don't think very much. I think he's really hurting, God. Like, really, really hurting, and I really wish there was something I could do to help. But I don't know what. He's really starting to scare me too, God, with all sorts of stuff. I'd get into it all, but it would take a while, and lasagna's heating up, and I think you know it all already anyway. I mean, you're God, right? You're supposed to know everything. I inwardly chuckled again. Way to go, Einstein, I said to myself. But if you don't for some reason, I said to God, just believe me when I say Uncle Jed's seriously struggling right now. You know what? Maybe you can do something to help him. You know, help him get over Aunt Eleanor's death. We both miss her a ton. My whole family does. But he's going through a crazy rough time right now. So it'd be super awesome if you could help him feel better in any way, if at all possible. Cool. Thanks so much, God, for everything. Oh, and if you could please give me a sign you heard me or are looking into giving Uncle Jed some help, that'd be super awesome too. So just let me know, in any way. All right. Thanks for listening. Hopefully I'll talk to you again real soon. I opened my eyes and sat there for a moment, waiting for something to happen, though I wasn't sure what exactly. Maybe some kind of voice or whisper or even light, heavenly music to filter down from the ceiling to let me know God heard me. Heck, even if the living room table started to wobble or hover a bit, that'd be pretty cool and then I'd know. But nothing happened. No objects moved. No music.
or voices sounded from anywhere in the room. Suddenly it felt as though a part of my energy sapped, and I sagged slightly in my seat. Oh well, that was a shame, although maybe he heard me anyway. I sat up straighter in my chair. Yeah, maybe he had. I had to admit I felt a bit lighter now that I'd talked to him, both mentally and physically. It actually felt good to get all that stuff off my chest in a way, and ask God to help someone I loved. Yeah, it actually seemed like a really good thing, talking to God. Heh, looked like Uncle Jed was right. I should do it more often. A beeping noise came from the direction of the kitchen, jolting me from my thoughts. "Jason?" Uncle Jed called. "Dinner's ready." "Coming." Not that I really wanted to go, as hungry as I was. I mean, I was really not looking forward to talking more with Uncle Jed. Wow, who would have thought that thought would ever have entered my mind? To think something like that about my very own Uncle Jed, who I used to love hanging out with so much. Oh well, hopefully all this weirdness wouldn't last very long. I desperately clung to that thought like a cat on a clothesline as I took a deep breath, got up, and headed toward the kitchen. Chapter 7. As I went into the kitchen, the delicious aroma of lasagna immediately smacked into me. Even though we wouldn't be having Uncle Jed's world-famous chili cheese dogs, I had to admit it did smell good. I sat at the table opposite Uncle Jed, a healthy bowl of lasagna at my spot. Like in the parlor, it was unearthly strange sitting there without Aunt Eleanor. Her typical chair also stood noticeably empty beside us, and that same cold chill wafted through me again. Aunt Eleanor, if only you knew the effect your loss is having on Uncle Jed, on all of us. If you can, if you're somewhere out there, please help us out, especially Uncle Jed. I think God would want you to, and I think he's planning on helping too. Uncle Jed took a bite of his lasagna and grimaced. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Is it bad?" "No, it's fine. Just a little bland." I ate a forkful myself and thought it was pretty good, but didn't mention it. "So, how was talking with God just now?" "Oh, pretty good, at least, I think. Well, he didn't actually answer me, but I think it went very well overall. I'm definitely going to do it more often." "Oh." Uncle Jed's facial features drooped, his gaze falling into his lasagna. "Crud, what's wrong?" He shook his head slightly, still looking down. "That's not a very good sign, Jason. Him not answering you." "Oh God, really? You had got to be kidding me. Looked like we were back to the same disturbing doom and gloom from earlier. Exactly what I wanted." "Well, he's clearly still very upset with you, Jason." He let out a light sigh. "I honestly fear the worst, I really do." "Of course you do, Uncle Jed." He looked up at me. "At least you tried, though. At this point, that's all you can do, really. And hopefully you've made at least a tiny bit of progress." I looked down at my own bowl. Yeah, I hope so. And I meant it. Even though Uncle Jed might have been a little mentally out of it at the moment, I couldn't really take the risk of what he said not being true. I definitely had to at least try to fix the situation with God, just in case. "So what do you think of the lasagna?" Uncle Jed asked with what sounded like a fake cheer. "Oh, very good." "Great." And he dove back in. "So what horror movie are we going to watch tonight?" I asked, desperate to change the topic. An old favorite or a newer one neither of us has seen before? Although, come to think of it, I wasn't sure there actually was a new one I hadn't seen yet. I kept pretty up to date when it came to scary movies. Uncle Jed's hand that held his fork froze midway to his mouth, his pupils shrinking to mere specks. "Horror?" His voice trembled as if the very word struck fear into his heart, and I stifled a laugh despite myself. But it didn't make any sense. Uncle Jed absolutely loved horror movies, and he always watched at least a couple with me whenever I visited, including one on the first night. That was our tradition, like the chili cheese dogs and the hot chocolate and cappuccino. Aunt Eleanor never watched with us, though, since she hated horror. Yeah, I said. So which do you think? Neither. I couldn't help but notice that his hand holding his fork was now quivering a bit. And never again. That's another thing God told me, that horror movies are pure evil. They're dreary, negative, and are sometimes even excessively violent. Right, that was true. Sort of like the violent video games he now apparently hated too. They've been brought to our existence by the devil himself, and therefore should never be indulged in, ever. And with that, he sucked his forkful of lasagna into his mouth and munched extra hard. Oh, okay. Sheesh, what a crazy transformation. To go from loving horror movies to absolutely hating them. It seemed a lot of that kind of thing had been going on with Uncle Jed recently. But something about it all still didn't make any sense to me. Wasn't horror just a form of entertainment? A type of escapism? There wasn't anything wrong with it really, right? So, I asked, what are we going to watch then? Well, I'd like to watch some of my favorite movies and TV shows after dinner, thank you very much. I gave him the most incredulous look I could muster. But all, or maybe I should say most of your favorite movies and TV shows are horror, Uncle Jed. Well, not anymore, old boy. Oh. We ate the rest of the meal in complete silence, and then I hiked it upstairs to my room as fast as humanly possible. I didn't bother to join him or even linger in the living room to see what he planned on watching. For the first time in my life, I wanted to be in a totally different room than him. No, a totally different universe. I tried to get my mind off that disturbing thought by sprawling on my bed and starting to read the horror book I brought. I made sure to keep my door open at least a crack, though, so I could hear Uncle Jed if he happened to come up the stairs. That way, I could hide the book if I had to. After all, there was no way I was letting him know I was reading a horror book, no matter what he claimed God said about the genre. I mean, horror books couldn't be evil. They just couldn't be. Uncle Jed was just plain going all out nutso. Besides, just looking at the book's cover, it had a creepy-looking old church on it. Made me think of the first horror book I ever read. The one that got me into the genre in the first place. It was a Goosebumps book by R.L. Stine, and I couldn't stop reading it. It had been one of the best days of my life, and I'd gone on to read the entire series. Thankfully, this book sucked me right in, too, and made me forget about this incredibly nerve-wracking visit to Uncle Jed's for a little while. It was about a family that moves into an old, creaky church out in the countryside that has a ghost haunting its bell tower. And the more the family tolls the bell, usually just for fun or to annoy the neighbors, the angrier and more destructive the ghost gets. In a way, I could relate to the family since I felt like I had something haunting me out in the countryside too. My own Uncle Jed. After I read a few chapters, curiosity finally gripped me like the ghost did its first victim's shoulders up in the bell tower, and I quietly tiptoed downstairs. I had just to see what Uncle Jed was watching, if he was still watching TV, of course. I poked my head in the living room, and sure enough, there he was, sitting on the couch, his gaze glued to the new, giant, crisp screen. I recognized the show immediately. What in the... No way. He couldn't possibly be serious. Why in the flaming gates of heck was Uncle Jed watching that of all things? Chapter 8.
Prairie Girls. He was watching Prairie Girls. I'd never seen an episode, but it was a pretty popular show about 4 girls between the ages of 8 and 13 who agree to run away from their terrible parents and live together on their own in an abandoned barn out in the countryside. Another story that takes place in the countryside. Who'da thunk? It was actually kind of an interesting premise, but it wasn't horror and definitely a show for young girls. Why was Uncle Jed watching a show for young girls of all things? Did God tell him that was the best, purest thing to watch or something? Seriously, this was all just getting weirder and weirder. I watched for a moment longer, then shook my head and stole back upstairs to my room. I read a couple more chapters of my book, then decided to hit the hay. I mean, what else could I do really besides watch TV in the parlor instead of the living room? And the parlor just had regular cable. None of the streaming devices with the awesome movies and TV shows I'd want to watch. Plus, I was sort of exhausted from the long car ride and Uncle Jed's non-stop spooky strangeness ever since I got here. Still, it took a bit for me to fall asleep, but when I did, I had the oddest dream ever. Or maybe it was actually more of a sensation. Whatever it was, it felt like something was touching me. Not my body, but my actual soul or essence or whatever, if there was such a thing. And this thing, whatever it was trying to penetrate my soul in some way, like go right through it and straight to its core. I could just tell, and I also had the feeling, a strong gut one, that it was bad it was there, like really bad. So I instinctually fought back, and the thing immediately removed itself from my soul or whatever, and totally vanished, never returned the rest of the night. When I woke up in the morning, the bizarre dream lingered, even though I was pretty sure it had happened hours ago in the middle of the night. But there is no doubt about it. It felt important in a way, even though I hadn't a clue what it was all about. One thing was for sure, though. I definitely never had a dream like that before. A dull light leaked through the partly open blinds, so I flicked the switch on my bedside lamp, but it didn't turn on. Huh? What the? I climbed to my feet, navigated to the switch by the door by memory, and flicked it, but the ceiling light didn't come on either. Crud. The power must have been out, which had never happened at Uncle Jed's before, and it looked like he didn't have a generator either. Oh well, I guess there was a first time for everything. I opened the blinds completely, only to stare out at another dark, gray, dreary day, rain spattering across the window. Ugh, that definitely didn't help. Come to think of it, I heard the rain pretty much all night. It probably hadn't stopped since I got here, which probably meant I wouldn't be going outside anytime soon either. Ugh. Not that I ever actually did go outside when I visited Uncle Jed, but it definitely beat being in a house without power, and it sure as heck beat being inside with Uncle Jed, not able to play zombie video games or watch any horror movies or TV shows. Seriously, this was shaping up to be the absolute worst Uncle Jed visit of all time. I really hoped he got better, and soon, like much better, and real soon. I headed downstairs to the kitchen. As expected, he was sitting at the table, a couple thick white candles and elegant brass holders lit and resting on it. That and what little bleak light leaked in through the window were barely enough to illuminate the room. The candlelight in particular winked off Uncle Jed's gold-trimmed white robe. Wait, where'd he get that thing? It kind of reminded me of Aunt Eleanor's elegant silver-trimmed robe. But what happened to his old red and yellow plaid one? I admit it'd been getting kind of faded and ratty looking, but I'd never seen him not wearing it in the morning. He was still wearing his straw hat at least, which was probably a good thing no matter what. I'd only seen it off his head once, at Aunt Eleanor's funeral when the pastor was speaking. He'd been holding it in his hands in front of him, revealing a bald, oddly shaped head with a couple stringy strands of white hair sticking off it.
Yet the hat was definitely a good thing no matter how you sliced it. As I sat at the table opposite him, I saw he was in the middle of eating a toaster tart with swirls of blue and purple syrup on it. Another one sat on his plate. Huh? When did he ever eat toaster tarts? Usually he had a full spread of toast, scrambled egg, and sausage out, though of course the power wasn't working this morning. The toaster tarts must have been cold. Good morning, Uncle Jed. He swallowed a mouthful of tart. Good morning, Jason. He gestured to 2 boxes of tarts on the table, one wild berry and the other brown sugar. Help yourself, and yes, unfortunately the power's out, so you'll have to eat them cold. Also, it may take a few days for the power company to fix it. Being way out here in the sticks certainly has its disadvantages at times. Oh yes, that's too bad. Well, way more than too bad, actually. I mean, it was awful enough I couldn't watch any horror movies or TV shows or play any video games, but now I couldn't watch TV at all or even access the internet. Well, unless I used my cell phone, of course. What in the flaming gates of heck was I gonna do around here for all that time? After I snagged a couple of toaster tarts, we ate silently, apparently having nothing to talk about, which was totally fine with me, to be completely honest. It didn't help Aunt Eleanor's seat still sat hauntingly empty. There might as well have been some kind of enormous stone statue of her or something sitting in it, one that took up nearly the entire rest of the room. Her absence was really that glaring. It was also super weird Uncle Jed and I didn't plan out our whole day in advance like we usually did during breakfast. For example, what video games we were going to play or what movies we were going to watch in the evening. Although the reasons for that were pretty obvious this time, of course. Sometimes we even picked out a restaurant in town to eat at for lunch or dinner. Not that there were many choices around here, but we at least went out a couple of times when I visited. But no, nothing but complete and utter silence this morning, for at least a good few solid minutes while Uncle Jed and I ate. When he finally finished, he waited patiently for me to also. I wanted to wait until you were done because, well, I have some extremely unfortunate news I need to tell you this morning, Jason. Oh? I wiped my lips with a napkin and put it on my empty plate. Crud. I really couldn't take any more bad news now. Not at this point. Like, really couldn't. I swear I was close to cracking as it was. What's that? Well, he looked down at his pale, crinkly hands on the table, then back up at me. His knobby shoulders sagged and shrank until they seemed to disappear completely. I just learned on the news this morning before the power went out that your mother and father, well, they've passed away. Chapter 9. It felt like the whole world, Uncle Jed, kitchen, and all, instantly and completely dissolved, becoming one huge empty vacuum, just an all-consuming black space that went on forever and ever. And there I was, floating along alone, inside it all, nothing and no one else in sight. And then what Uncle Jed just said slammed me full in the face. What? Was all I could finally push out. He nodded slowly, his eyes red and shimmery. They passed away, Jason. Their plane hit a flock of seagulls on its way to California and crashed into the side of a mountain. Your mom and dad, they perished along with everyone else on the flight. I'm so sorry, Jason. I'm so sorry. He continued to gaze at me, and I stared right back, his face in the kitchen blurring until the pure blackness took over again. My mind tried to grapple with what he just said, snag any part of it and hold on to it, but it all just kept sliding through my brain like sand from the top of a bottomless hourglass, down and right out the bottom. It couldn't be true. It just couldn't be.
There was no way any of what he just said could have possibly happened. It didn't make any sense.
"I'm so sorry, Jason," he whispered.
No. No, I screamed. I put my head in my hands, balled up my hair in my fists so tightly pain pinched my scalp. No, 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 I screamed. You're lying, Uncle Jed. You're straight up lying to me. As soon as I said it, I felt absolutely awful. He didn't deserve for me to yell at him like that, especially since it was also his brother and sister-in-law who just tragically died. And let's not forget he also lost Aunt Eleanor only a few weeks ago, too. But he just shook his head calmly.
"I'm afraid I'm not, Jason, and I'm just as devastated as you are. Really, I am."
No, this is all a joke. A sick joke, it has to be. In fact, this whole visit has been. You've been pulling my leg ever since Mom and Dad dropped me off here, haven't you, Uncle Jed? Haven't you? Haven't you been? Just admit it. Admit it now, Uncle Jed.
"Jason."
Just admit it. Just admit it. I leaped from my seat and pointed a shaky finger at him, welding my gaze to his as fiercely as I could. He looked back at me, all his facial features drooping, his eyes almost as red and bleary as they were at Aunt Eleanor's funeral. And that was really saying something. Then I grunted, whirled around, and stormed from the kitchen. I hung an immediate left into the living room and crashed my whole body onto the couch, smushing my face against one of the end cushions. Then the tears came, hard, fast, and uncontrollable. They leaked from my eyes right into the cushion, soaking it almost instantly. I cried for what could have been either a couple of seconds or a whole day. I honestly didn't know. All I knew is it didn't make any sense. None of it. How could Mom and Dad die? And not just one of them, but both. They couldn't die. I needed them. God, I needed them so badly, and they needed me for the rest of our lives. Or at least as long as possible. Wasn't that how this whole parent-kid thing was supposed to work? But no, apparently not. Apparently they abandoned me. They just flat out left this awful, pitiful life, stranding me here, alone, with only a couple friends and now a weird and creepy as heck Uncle Jed. Nope, no way. I'd never forgive them for this. This was all their faults, them and their stupid, successful software company they started together. If they hadn't, none of this would have happened. If they hadn't, they never would have gone on that stupid business trip, or any of the others in the first place. And their plane never would have hit that stupid, godforsaken flock of seagulls and crashed into that stupid, godforsaken mountain. I knew it. I just knew something was off in the universe as soon as I got here. Nothing had been right. It had all been wrong from the very beginning. Finally, I pulled my face away from the cushion, sat up straight on the couch, and dried my tear-stained face with the back of my hands. Uncle Jed stood in the living room doorway. The fact the power was out and there weren't any candles in the living room made his face an especially deep, dark shadow, his sunken eyes 2 dim orbs.
"I'm so sorry, Jason," he murmured. "For both of us. Our whole family, really."
I shifted my attention to the blank TV screen. I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it.
I know, he said, as if reading my mind. It's something a child should never have to experience. Or anyone, for that matter. The death of one's parents, it's truly horrendous, no matter how you slice it. But this is life, Jason, and, well, sometimes terrible things happen. Tragic things. And sometimes those tragic things are out of our control, and, well, sometimes they're not. The way he emphasized the word not made me whip my gaze back to him. Huh? What do you mean? Jason, I spoke with God after I heard the horrible news this morning, and, well, I learned
I learned that what happened to your parents had to do with what I spoke to you about last night." "What? What in the flaming gates of heck do you mean? Seriously, he had a heck of a lot of explaining to do right now." Uncle Jed winced at the word heck. "What happened to them? It's that terrible thing I was talking about. The tragic thing I thought was going to happen because you weren't talking to God enough, not praying or going to church enough." He nodded especially slowly, the weight of his words pushing down on me as if they were each solid 2-ton bricks. "You did this to your mom and dad, Jason. You did this to all of us. This is all your fault." Chapter 10. What? No way! I sank even farther into the couch, which threatened to swallow me whole. I wished it would. The tears threatened to come back again. How? And why? "I'm sorry, Jason. I'm so sorry." I couldn't say anything. Couldn't utter a single sound. I couldn't make sense of any of this all. Not a single smidgen of it. Then something hit me, and I wrenched myself back into a sitting position. "But I don't get it, Uncle Jed. If God's so angry with me, then why would he punish my mom and dad? Why would he make their airplane crash and kill them instead of murder me or do something terrible to me? I mean, I'm the one who messed up, right? Not them." My voice came out extra shrill on that last word, but Uncle Jed didn't even flinch, just stared at me with those cold, dark eyes. "Those are very good questions, Jason, and I honestly don't know the answers to them. What I can say, though, is God works in mysterious ways. Oh, and he's always trying to teach us humans a lesson. Clearly, he's trying to teach you an extremely valuable lesson here." I looked down into my lap. Was that what was really going on here? God literally took both Mom and Dad's lives to teach me a lesson? He would really do something like that? I guessed it was possible. "But what lesson is that?" I asked. "What's he trying to teach me, Uncle Jed? To talk to him and go to church more?" He nodded slowly. "At the very least, I'd say, Jason. At the very least." Okay, but I couldn't even begin to think about doing those things right now. I still couldn't get over the brutal, horrifying shock that both Mom and Dad were dead, that I'd never get to see their beautiful, smiling faces ever again in my entire life. As if reading my mind, Uncle Jed said, "Don't worry. God understands you, and me as well. We need to go through a grieving period. It's understandable. That's part of why he also told me you aren't to leave the house under any circumstances, not even to visit the church." Which was actually just down the street. We passed it whenever we went into town. "At least for now." What? Why not? "As part of your punishment. He wants you to think about the error of your ways. Really do some soul searching. That's why the power's out as well. He doesn't want you to have any distractions whatsoever. That includes your cell phone, too." He held out his pale, wrinkly hand. "So, come on now, hand it over, old boy. You are not to have access to it for the foreseeable future." I gave it to him without even thinking, my body and mind still numb to the core over what just happened, what was happening. As he put my phone into his pocket, I said, "Oh, I see." It was all making sense. Okay. I'll definitely do some soul searching then, Uncle Jed. Thanks so much for telling me all this, and thanks for, well, being there for me." A lump caught in my throat as I said that, and I was afraid I was going to start crying again. Uncle Jed just nodded, his eyes still enshrouded in a heavy mist. "Of course, Jason. I wish these were better circumstances, far better, but you are welcome all the same. I need to be alone now." I got up
and pushed past his position by the doorway. "I understand, old boy." I went up to my room and crashed on my bed. I couldn't even think about doing anything right now, not a single thing. The intense shock and horror of losing Mom and Dad kept rolling through me, leaving me empty and questioning everything I thought I knew about life. It was unreal, surreal really, like I was living in a dream, a nightmare, and there was no way to wake up, no way to get out of it. I was stuck here, stuck in this dreary, miserable, godforsaken house for who knew how long with Uncle Jed and no more Mom and Dad. Oh God, how I wished I could wake up. Please just let me wake up, God. Please just let me wake up from this total and complete nightmare. Wait, God. I sat up straight on my bed and closed my eyes. Dear God, it's me, Jason. Jason Hardwick. I mentally slapped myself. Of course he knew that. God, I just wanted to say I'm really sorry. Like really, 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 really sorry I didn't talk to you enough. That I'm not close to you. I didn't mean not to be, ever. And I do want to be close to you. I really do. So please don't give up on me, God. I'm here. Right here. I'm here for you, God. Whenever you want to talk to me, okay? Please tell me you're there. Please tell me you're listening, God. I held my breath and sat as still as possible. Total silence, as thick as this house's old walls hung in the air, filling every crevice of both the room and my soul. Crud. That wasn't a good sign. Not at all. But I wasn't about to give up. Heck no. Please, God, you have to know. You have to know that I love you. I really do. And I'm sorry for the past and what I've done and not being able to be close enough to you, but I promise I will be from now on. I'll talk to you and pray and visit church every chance I get, and I hope you'll find it in your heart to forgive me and talk back to me at some point too. Also, if you could, please also find it in your heart to somehow not make Mom and Dad be dead, or undo their deaths if that's at all possible. They're totally innocent after all. And they're such awesome parents and people, as I'm sure you know. So please bring them back to life. Please don't make their plane have crashed. I don't care if you have to rewind time back a few hours or even years. Heck, I don't even care if I never get another Christmas or birthday present for the whole rest of my life. I want more than anything for Mom and Dad to be here again. I miss them so much, God, and I love them so much too. Please, God. You just have to bring them back. Oh, and please don't do anything to Uncle Jed. He's a great uncle. He might be really hurting right now, what with Aunt Eleanor's death and all, and now Mom and Dad's. But he's such an amazing guy and deserves to be happy too. So please don't do anything to him because of what I've done or didn't do. Please. Anyway, thanks so much for listening, God. I waited another moment, but no response came from God yet again. No voice or sound of light music or anything. Oh well, I would try again a bit later. Then I stretched back out on my stomach on the bed and just lay there for hours. No matter how hard I tried, I still couldn't wrap my head around Mom and Dad being dead. A part of me wondered if I ever truly would. At one point, I also couldn't help but wonder what this meant in terms of my living arrangements. Did this mean Uncle Jed was now my legal guardian? That I'd now live in this house and go to the local middle school in town? I couldn't think too much about that, though, as that life felt like 1,000,000,000 miles away right now. All I could do was concentrate on the immense hurt, pain, and anguish over the sudden loss of Mom and Dad that kept rolling through me nonstop. I must have lain there all day, even dozing off a bit a couple times, because eventually Uncle Jed shouted that it was time for dinner. The sun was setting outside my window, but it was still so rainy I could barely tell. Still, I must have slept and lain around all right through lunch and up to dinner. And to think, Uncle Jed hadn't even come up to my room to try and comfort me or see how I was doing, or even to offer lunch. Another extremely strange out-of-character thing for him, no doubt. Oh well. I guess that wasn't necessarily a bad thing, though. I mean, I had to admit I wasn't even remotely in the mood to eat or talk with him again after this unbelievably horrific day. Still, I managed to slowly pull myself to my feet and shuffle downstairs. I might as well have tried to get some food in me, as hopefully it'd help me feel at least a little better. Unfortunately, it didn't, though, and Uncle Jed and I didn't even talk at all this time as we stuffed more cold toaster tarts into our mouths. Seriously, didn't he have anything else in the pantry? He seemed to eat a lot livelier than me for some reason, though, and I couldn't help but wonder why or what he'd done all day. There was literally nothing to do with the power out after all. After dinner, I slogged back upstairs, and despite all the naps I'd already taken, fell right to sleep. But unfortunately, it was one of the most restless nights I'd ever had in my entire life. Chapter 11. That night, the strange sensation I'd had the night before returned. It felt as if some presence, some thing, tried to penetrate my actual soul or being or whatever, and this time, it actually was able to a little bit. Apparently, my essence couldn't resist this strange entity as strong as it could the night before. Still, the struggle didn't last all too long. Like last time, my soul or whatever eventually fought the strange force off and pushed it out of my essence. I only remembered the whole struggle when I woke up the next morning to yet another dreary, soggy day. Ugh, great. Not that the weather mattered all that much, though, given all that had happened yesterday. Seriously, it all still felt so incredibly awful and surreal. Like I'd really wake up any second, and a couple of days from now, Mom and Dad would drive down the driveway in their big black Buick on a bright and cheery sunny day, so happy to see me and Uncle Jed like they always were when they came back from their trip. Oh, Mom and Dad, why can't you just be alive? Why can't you be right here, right now, with me and Uncle Jed? As Uncle Jed predicted, the power was still out too. Again, not that it mattered, since I didn't feel like doing a single darn thing anyway. I'd call Jeremy and tell him about everything that had happened, have him console me like the awesome friend he was, but obviously, I couldn't, since Uncle Jed still had my phone. I couldn't help but wonder how long that would last, too. I spent most of the day lounging in my room, talking to God again, and asking for his forgiveness, and to bring Mom and Dad back, but unfortunately, he still didn't answer, and nothing happened that proved he'd even listened to me in the first place. I didn't even bother trying to read my horror book at some point either. No way I was in the mood, and it was much too dark in my room anyway. I could have asked Uncle Jed for a candle to put on my nightstand, but he was still the absolute last person I wanted to talk to right now, although I did wind up eating both lunch and dinner with him, both in total silence yet again. I went to the bed that night totally defeated, even more deflated than I was before. After all, nothing I did seemed to help the incredibly god-awful situation. Mom and Dad were still dead. Uncle Jed was still weird and kind of creepy. The power was still out, and I still didn't have my cell phone, and God still didn't seem to be listening to me. Things honestly couldn't have gotten any worse. And in a way, that seemed to show too, since I had that weird dream yet again that night. Although this time, the odd foreign entity was able to penetrate even farther into my soul, and it hung around even longer before I finally managed to push it out. I hadn't a single clue what was going on with that bizarre dream, but one thing was absolutely certain. It couldn't possibly be good. Nope, not the tiniest bit. Chapter 12. The next day was just like the last couple. I lounged around, talked and prayed to God as much as possible, and ate lunch and dinner with Uncle Jed. But still nothing changed. No responses from God or signs he's heard me. The power was still out. I wondered if Uncle Jed had already arranged Mom and Dad's funerals, but I didn't even want to ask. As if to add insult to injury, the rain and dark clouds still hung around outside too, like they'd been permanently anchored in the sky. At one point, I couldn't take the dreary monotony anymore and decided to explore the house while Uncle Jed was napping in the living room. He clearly had nothing to do either. I snagged one of the candles from the kitchen and started with the basement, working my way up from there. I avoided the living room, though, since Uncle Jed was there. But unfortunately, there wasn't much to see, considering I knew the house pretty well already. Plus, I could only actually see so much in front of me due to the weak candlelight. If anything, the house seemed spookier and murkier than ever, inky black patchiness always lingering just beyond a few feet from wherever I was. Eventually, I made it to the second floor, scoping out another large, empty guest room right next to mine that looked as if it had never been touched. The rooms were pretty much identical in every single way. Then I explored the spacious, dusty study of sorts further down the hall near Uncle Jed and Aunt Eleanor's. Well, now just Uncle Jed's bedroom. It had a large mahogany desk, a bookshelf crammed with ancient, cover-tattered college texts, and a fraying blue and white striped throw rug in the middle of the floor. It appeared as though Uncle Jed, as well as Aunt Eleanor when she was alive, never used this room either. Finally, I stepped up to Uncle Jed's bedroom door. I'd never actually been inside this room before. I mean, why would I have? But I couldn't help but let curiosity slither around inside me like a mischievous snake. What was in there exactly? And was it different now that Aunt Eleanor was no longer with us and Uncle Jed was clearly so different himself now? Even though I couldn't possibly know if that last one was the case either way, I couldn't stop myself from putting my hand on the doorknob and slowly turning it. Yep, I was going in. This was the perfect time, after all. Uncle Jed was fast asleep downstairs, and there was nowhere else to go and nothing else to do. I slowly opened the door, which let out a light creak, and stepped inside. Chapter 13. At first I couldn't see much, of course, since my candle only illuminated so much around me, but once I made my way a bit farther into the room, I jolted to a stop. What the? Taped across one of the dark turquoise walls were posters of that popular boy band, Kids for Life. The three so-called hunky boys, not that I would categorize them as that, all smiled back at me with their picture-perfect haircuts, shiny, pearl-white teeth, and adorable cheek dimples. If I remember correctly, one was my age, one a couple years older, and one a couple years older than that. But seriously, what in the flaming gates of heck were posters of these guys doing on Uncle Jed's bedroom wall? He was a 73-year-old man, not a preteen or teenaged girl. And these wouldn't have been Aunt Eleanor's posters either. I mean, well, maybe she happened to actually like Kids for Life's poppy music, even if she knew about it in the first place. But it was incredibly hard to imagine her having an actual poster of the group on her and Uncle Jed's bedroom wall. Like she'd been an 84-year-old woman herself. The wall also sported a couple of posters of the TV show Prairie Girls cast, one of them in the middle of shooting on set, the other displaying the actors poised in front of a black background, looking dead seriously at the camera. Okay, well, these two posters were definitely Uncle Jed's, given his obvious new love for Prairie Girls, which meant maybe the Kids for Life ones were actually his too. I moved to the large king bed, which was just as bizarre as the wall. The mattress was covered in a thick, bright pink blanket sporting a bunch of blue-eyed unicorns in different positions, sitting, standing, walking. They were also displayed from all different angles, side, front, even back. Unicorns? When did Uncle Jed or Aunt Eleanor, for that matter, freaking like unicorns? I definitely never heard either of them mention anything about them before. Kids for Life? Prairie Girls? Blue-eyed unicorns? Were these all things God told Uncle Jed to like? Did he tell him they were good, pure, holy things, or something that he ought to replace his affinity for darker, edgier stuff with the likes of them? Although all those things definitely breathed an air of purity in a way, something still didn't seem quite right about the situation. Something was horribly wrong here. Horribly, horribly wrong, though I didn't know what exactly. Then my gaze fell upon what lay on Uncle Jed's pillow. Oh, you had got to be kidding me. Chapter 14. None other than a plump, brown, medium-sized teddy bear lay on top of Uncle Jed's bright pink pillow. What the? Why would Uncle Jed have a freaking teddy bear? I mean, again, he was a 73-year-old man. Still, I had to admit the bear was pretty adorable, its dark brown glass eyes winking back at me in the candlelight. And then something else sparkled too, along the side of the stuffed animal's body. I leaned toward it, bringing the candle up close. It appeared to be a tiny piece of glass embedded in the teddy's fur. I reached out and carefully removed the shard just to be sure. Yep, that was what it was. What the heck had that been doing there? And where'd it come from? I dropped the shard into the tin garbage can by the bed with a light clang, and the snag of news I'd overheard on the TV in the parlor when I first got to Uncle Jed's house told in my mind. How someone had broken into the house of a local 12-year-old girl who tragically died recently and stolen her teddy bear without the home security system catching a glimpse of the culprit. The news crew had said whoever did the despicable deed broke a first-floor window to get in, too. I glanced into the trash can, the shard of glass glinting in the candlelight again. Was that where the teddy bear and piece of glass had come from? Had Uncle Jed recently broken into that poor deceased girl's house and stolen her teddy bear? The bear's fur somehow snagging a piece of the window's glass as he escaped? I mean, it had to have been him rather than Aunt Eleanor, since the little girl died a week after her. Come on, Jason, don't be totally ridiculous. That doesn't make the tiniest bit of sense. There's absolutely no reason Uncle Jed would do something so completely random and evil like that, even if the girl did live nearby and he actually happened to know her personally. Then again, I glanced at the bright pink with unicorns blanket and then the wall where all the strange preteen girl posters were hanging, although I couldn't make them out from here due to the dimness. So incredibly weird. I mean, seriously, why was Uncle Jed behaving like a 12-year-old girl? Well, except for the breaking and entering a house part. It just didn't make any sense. I simply couldn't wrap my brain around it no matter how hard I tried. Maybe there was something else around here that would give me a clue about what was going on. I picked up the teddy bear and inspected it, turning it around completely as I did. There wasn't much else odd or suspicious about the adorable little thing, though. It was just a normal brown teddy bear, though like all stuffed animals, it had a tag. I brought the candle up close to it. Andy Mills Toy Company was printed on the tag in official bold font. The name didn't ring a bell, but there was also something else that appeared to be handwritten in thin black Sharpie. Property of Angelica Swenson. That must have been the name of the young girl Uncle Jed had stolen the bear from. But again, why would he have done such a ridiculous, terrible thing? Just then, footsteps and what sounded like a loud muttering told from downstairs. Crud. Uncle Jed was awake. I quickly placed the teddy bear back on top of the pillow and quietly slunk from the room. Then I closed the door behind me as quietly as I could, though it still made a light creak, which made me cringe. Jason? Uncle Jed shouted from downstairs. I froze, my heart now shuddering horribly in my chest. Yes, Uncle Jed? Time for dinner. I breathed in an inward sigh of relief, all my muscles in my body relaxing. Thank God. I hadn't even known it was that late in the day already. Chapter 15. After more cold toaster tarts, I prayed and talked to God the whole rest of the evening, but like all the other times, he still wouldn't answer me. Sheesh, he must have really hated me. Like really, really. Clearly he must have thought I deserved to lose my incredibly awesome parents. So much he wouldn't even give me the tiniest, most microscopic chance to redeem myself. Man, I must have been a horrible person. Like the worst. I deserved everything I got. And maybe, just maybe, I deserved to die too. Like Mom and Dad, and even Aunt Eleanor. Thinking about Mom and Dad brought back the incredible grief and agony of their loss again. The endless pain followed by emptiness that always kept cycling through me whenever I did. I'm so sorry, Mom and Dad. I'm so sorry I did this to you, to our family. I swear I didn't mean to. I love you both so insanely much. You know that. I know you do. And you know what else? Maybe I'll get to see you again. Maybe, just maybe, if God finally gives me a chance, I'll get to join you up in heaven at some point, because I know that's where you guys are, and be with you forever. Oh God, what if you never do give me another chance and I'm going straight to hell? What if I'm on some long, weary, or even short ride of sorts that eventually drops me off in the very bowels of hell, where I'm going to wither away and rot forever? I couldn't keep my mind off those horrific questions, and they kept plaguing me throughout that night, making it extremely difficult to fall asleep. But I must have at some point, because I had that incredibly bizarre, unnerving dream again, and this time I only barely managed to fend off whatever was trying to invade and take over my soul. For a moment I thought for sure I wouldn't be able to, that the mysterious force would finally smother me, banishing me from this horrible, miserable existence forever. To this day, I still can't believe I managed to stave it off. Nothing short of a miracle, for sure. When I woke up, raindrops still clung to my bedroom window, but the sun finally peeked through the clouds, lending what felt like warmth and brightness to my room. Yes, a sort of sunny day. Things were actually looking up a little for once. It's funny how the smallest stuff can give you an incredible amount of joy, even when the world is crashing down all around you. I mean, I'm not going to lie, I wanted to sing. I wanted to dance. I felt like crying, but for joy rather than sheer misery like the past few days. The sun was actually out. The rain and darkness had finally been banished. Heck, maybe this meant something. Maybe God was starting to change his mind. Maybe he was finally giving me the second chance I'd been so desperately hoping for the past 72 hours or so. Before I knew it, I was bounding down the old worn stairs, still wearing my pajamas, and practically waltzed into the kitchen. "Uncle Jed," I cried, "the sun is out. No more rain, no more dark, dreary days. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that just absolutely incredibly amazing? And you know what else, Uncle Jed? Maybe, just maybe, this means—" "It doesn't mean anything." Uncle Jed sat at his usual spot at the kitchen table, his new gold-trimmed white robe illuminated by the candles and weak sheet of sunlight slanting through the window. 2 brown sugar toaster tarts lay on his plate. "God is still upset with you, Jason. Extremely upset. He's only making it a little nicer outside now to show you what you're missing out on, and that you're no longer allowed to enjoy, as you ought to remain fully inside for the foreseeable future. He told me so himself this morning, so you are not to leave this house under any circumstances. Do you understand me, young man?" He picked up one of the toaster tarts and took a large bite, his cold, dead gaze glued to mine. All the adrenaline and positive energy that had been rushing through my body drained right out in a single rush, plopping to the floor and sifting through the floorboards, never to be seen again. Mother of all bat crud. That was the absolute last thing I wanted to hear. How could God do this to me? To us? "Oh, okay, and yeah, I get it, I understand, Uncle Jed. Just when I thought things were finally turning around." I sat into my spot at the table and forced myself to eat a wild berry toaster tart, which was a struggle to say the least. It was getting harder and harder to eat these days, as I was never all that hungry anymore. I was surprised I was even able to stomach the whole toaster tart this morning. After breakfast, I went back upstairs and just lay on my bed yet again. I thought about talking to God again, but I just couldn't muster the energy. Clearly, he still hated me and wanted me to suffer for the errors of my ways, and there seemed to be absolutely nothing I could do about it. Absolutely nothing. It really just wasn't even worth the effort. As I lay there, my mind a total blank, my body devoid of the tiniest smidge of energy, more and more clouds evaporated from the sky, causing the sun to shine even more light into my room. Eventually, even the small pockets of darkness lurking into the corners vanished too. Of course, just like Uncle Jed said, God was now making it an outright beautiful day just to mock me, to make me suffer. And the day continued to get better too, until nothing but bright blue stretched across the sky outside my window, not a single cloud in sight. It was at that point I decided I just plain couldn't take it anymore. All this sitting and moping around, feeling totally drained and dejected. I couldn't lie on this stupid bed anymore. I couldn't be in this stupid house anymore. With more energy than I knew I even had, I pulled myself to my feet and headed back downstairs. I peeked my head into the living room. Ah, Uncle Jed was napping. Good. Not that that was surprising, though, given there wasn't much to do around here right now, and he was a pretty elderly guy. And not that I really cared one way or another anyway. Without giving it a second thought, I hiked right back through the main hall to the front door, opened it as quietly as I could, and snuck outside. The intense summer sun immediately beamed down on me, making me feel like the very rays of heaven were gracing me. The thought made me feel absolutely incredible, but also kind of freaked me out at the same time. After all, according to Uncle Jed, I was going against God's wishes, yet again. And considering I was already on both their bat crud lists, that couldn't be a good thing. But in the moment, I honestly didn't care. It was just so amazing being outside, even farther away from Uncle Jed than I'd been all week. So I kept heading further away, along the pebbly driveway and past the stone cross jutting out from the grassy earth midway along it off to the side. A sharp shiver rippled along my spine at the sight of the cross, but I pushed onward anyway. Screw it. Screw being inside moping over poor Mom and Dad's deaths. Screw being stuck in a pitch-dark house with no TV, video games, or cell phone. And screw Uncle Jed and all his crazy talks of God, because maybe that's really what this all is. Him being absolutely, unequivocally bat crud crazy. It's possible, right? I mean, I don't know why God's not answering me. I really don't. But Uncle Jed's been absolutely nutso recently, and there's no doubt about it. Like, off the rocker nutso. So screw it. I'm going to go for a nice, leisurely stroll on a nice sunny day, and nobody's going to stop me. Not even God. At least I hope not. When I made it to the end of the driveway, I hung a left onto the narrow country road that eventually meandered into the center of town, about a mile or so away, if I remembered correctly. Perfect. I couldn't wait to get there. It'd be nice to see the center again. Let all the actually good memories of visiting it with Uncle Jed and Aunt Eleanor wash over me. Grabbing slices at the pizza place, making a quick trip to the grocery store. Maybe I'd even check out that weirdo psychic store that was on the end of the chain of shops. It had been there ever since I could remember, but I'd never gone inside. Plus, when I got to town center, if I got there, I'd be even farther away from Uncle Jed's currently dreary as heck house. As I went, I passed a couple open fields, patches of forest, and a few old withered homes and barn houses. Not exactly scintillating stuff, but if the town center was the same as it was every year, it was at least nice enough. About half a mile along the road, I came across the long stone church and cemetery Aunt Eleanor had been buried in a couple of weeks ago. As I passed the open black iron gate that led into the cemetery, my mind flashed back to that dark, gloomy day. Chapter 16. It was the day of Aunt Eleanor's funeral. Drizzly, with gray storm clouds blotting out most of the sky, as if they wished to erase the day from memory. Honestly, that would have been nice. Uncle Jed, Mom, Dad, me, and a few close friends and family members were all clustered around Aunt Eleanor's all-black casket in the cemetery. At one point, I stood right next to the casket, gazing down at Aunt Eleanor's pale, lifeless body in her lacy, all-white dress. Her eyes were closed, facing the sky, as if her soul had already departed for heaven and she was at peace. Knowing her, both those things were probably true. As I continued to stand there, I overheard Dad talking with Uncle Jed beside me.
"You know what my absolute greatest fear was ever since I first met her?" Uncle Jed asked.
"What's that?"
"Losing her."
Ah. Dad let that hang there, clearly not sure what to say. I would have been darned if I did either.
"You know what my second fear was?"
"Scratch that. Still is?"
"What's that?"
Though the strained quality to Dad's voice made it sound like he didn't really want to know, couldn't argue with him either.
"That I'd never get over her death. That I'd ultimately succumb to the overbearing pain of her passing and never be able to enjoy life or even face it for the rest of my poor, miserable days."
I glanced over at Dad and Uncle Jed, who was looking down while holding his straw hat in his hands. Wisps of his stringy white hair hung down from his oddly shaped head, and even though it was drizzling out, I suspected some of the liquid drops cascading below his head were tears. Dad wrapped an arm around Uncle Jed's shoulders and squeezed tight.
"Oh, Jedediah, you're going to be fine. Completely fine, you'll see. And I believe there's an old wise saying that goes something like, 'Don't be sad it's over. Be glad it happened.' Eleanor was obviously an extremely special woman. You and all of us were incredibly likely to have had her in our lives, and we'll all remember her forever."
Tears gleamed up in Uncle Jed's eyes as he looked back up.
"Thank you, Joseph. That means a lot to me. And you're right. I shouldn't be sad. I should be grateful. Extremely grateful."
He started sobbing loudly, so I shifted my attention back to Aunt Eleanor's limp, peaceful body. She really did look happy, like she'd greatly enjoyed her time in this life and had gone on to an even better place. I really hoped that was true. Just as I thought that, though, the oddest thing started to happen. The corner of her mouth started to curl upward into a little smile. At least I could have sworn it was doing that. I blinked hard, and yes, it was still moving, ever so slowly. I glanced at Dad and Uncle Jed again to see if they were witnessing what I was, but they were both still busy talking, tears still eking from Uncle Jed's eyes. I looked back down at Aunt Eleanor. Now the other side of her mouth was curling up too. No, it couldn't be. It couldn't possibly be true. I had to be hallucinating, or this had to be some kind of crazy optical illusion or something. I mean, this was just flat out unreal. Finally, a huge, full-grown smile bloomed on her old, wrinkly face. "Guys," I finally managed to say to Dad and Uncle Jed, my gaze still plastered to Aunt Eleanor. "Guys, look." But then her eyes shot open, milky, all-white eyes with no pupils, as she wrenched her hand out and clasped my wrist. She tightened her grip as I let out a loud scream, an overbearingly powerful force invading me, totally paralyzing me. What the heck is going on? But it was obvious enough. The force was exactly like the one that had been trying to penetrate what felt like my very soul in the middle of the night at Uncle Jed's house. Only in this case, I knew it was Aunt Eleanor's soul doing the invading, and it was succeeding. "Give in, Jason," her voice whispered, reverberating through my whole being, body and soul. "Give in to me. I want your body and mind, Jason. I want your life. I might have been an elderly woman when I passed, but I don't want to leave this world quite yet. I'm not ready. There's so much more I want to do, and I can't leave my beloved Jedediah all alone. So please, Jason, please give me your life so that I can continue living and being with Jedediah. I beg of you." I fought her as hard as I could, using every last ounce of strength and energy I had, but I couldn't stop her. She was way too strong and way too determined. And then she did it. Her soul stabbed right through my soul's core, weakening it to the point it started to flutter upward out of my body. As I drifted away, I looked back at my body, the tall, strongly built frame, the short, spiky black hair standing beside Aunt Eleanor's casket. I also couldn't help but notice she was no longer smiling, but the face of my body was, and I knew it was no longer me doing the smiling. It was her. Thank you, Jason. My body waved at me as my soul continued to drift upward, off into the sky above, which had become a glaring bright white light. Thank you so much. You were always such a sweetheart. And goodbye. Goodbye forever. At that moment, I noticed everyone else at the funeral was smiling and waving at me, too. Goodbye, Jason. They all murmured at the same time. Goodbye forever. I tried to wave or say goodbye back, that maybe I'd see them all in heaven someday, but I was just a soul. I had no body to do those things anymore. Besides, maybe that last part wasn't actually true anyway. And then the bright white light completely consumed me, everything immediately fading to pitch black. Chapter 17. Son, are you all right? Called a deep, oddly familiar voice. I jolted awake and glanced rapidly around me, although my vision was pretty blurry. What? Where in the flaming gates of heck am I? What is going on? Finally, my vision solidified. I was lying on a narrow strip of grass bordered on one side by the country road Uncle Jed's house was on and the cemetery's iron fence on the other. A tall, middle-aged man wearing a black suit and a chain with a silver cross around his neck leaned over me. He had especially bushy brown eyebrows and a forehead as broad as a wooden plank. Ah, no wonder his voice sounded familiar. He'd been the pastor at Aunt Eleanor's funeral. Son? I yanked myself to my feet and dusted off the back of my shirt and shorts. It had all been a dream. Just a bad dream. A reimagining of sorts of Aunt Eleanor's funeral. Only the real version hadn't had that incredibly freaky her waking up and possessing me with her soul part at the very end. Whoa, take it easy, boy. The pastor slowly looked me up and down, quirking an eyebrow at me. Say, you look awfully familiar. Were you here at this church at some time of service fairly recently? Yeah, I was. It was my Aunt Eleanor's funeral, Eleanor Hardwick. She lived down here in town, and, my uncle still does. The man's eyes twinkled. Ah, yes, that's right. Remember it well. Sorry again about your aunt, son. She was such a wonderful woman, and I'm sure she's been treated like how she deserves up in heaven. Your uncle's an upstanding man as well. I just wish he, attended church more often, he grumbled. Wait, my Uncle Jed? Ever since Eleanor died, how often has he attended church? I couldn't fight my curiosity. Well, I don't think he actually has a single time, son. In fact, I'm pretty sure I've only seen him attend a handful of times ever since he moved to this town a few decades or so ago. Whoa. I mean, that made sense in a way, but was still kind of weird. After all, the past few days, Uncle Jed had rambled on and on about how he was a changed man ever since Aunt Eleanor died, and how he'd become much closer to God and all that. And yet, according to the pastor, he hadn't even attended church once since her death. The pastor frowned, his gaze growing crisp like grown-ups do when they're about to be real firm with you. Anyway, you better be careful, boy. Falling asleep on the side of a road, even a hardly traveled country bumpkin one like this one, is never a good idea. Lord knows what sudden, unexpected tragedy could have befallen you. Best to keep napping, or any form of sleep for that matter, to the safety of your bedroom. Or at least living room couch. Catch my drift, son? He kept his gaze solidly on mine. Yes, sir, definitely. I'm not really sure why I fell asleep, actually. Well, it probably had to do with the intense sunlight beaming down from above, as well as the deep, horrible depression I'd sunk into the last few days. Funny thing about depression, you're exhausted all the time, no matter how much sleep you get. Then something hit me. Say, Mr. Pastor Wilson. Right, but you may call me Paul. Okay, Paul. Do you happen to know anything about a girl named Angelica Swenson by any chance? A shadow slid behind Mr. Wilson's eyes, his whole body suddenly rigid as if it had just been cast in marble. Yeah, I know of her. Her family lives up on the hill overlooking the center of town. What do you want to know? Well, for one, how did she die exactly? She's the one who tragically passed away recently, right? The shadow deepened,
encompassing Mr. Wilson's whole body and almost making him look like a gargoyle of sorts. I held back a shiver that threatened to assault my shoulders. "Oh, you don't know, do you?" I shook my head. He took a deep sigh, glanced down at the ground, then back up at me. "Well, son, as it turns out, it's, your uncle Jed who killed her." Chapter 18. What? I found myself spitting out before I could help it. Uncle Jed killed her? My Uncle Jed? He murdered a poor, innocent girl named Angelica Swenson? Mr. Wilson tossed up his hands. No, not exactly. Sorry, son. I should have been more succinct. It was an accident, a complete and total accident. Oh, thank God. Seriously, I wasn't sure what I'd do if my very own uncle was a murderer. I mean, I was related to the guy. Plus, even though he'd never done any harm to me during my 12 years of life, I currently was living with him. My heart rate started to lower, my heaving chest settling down. I actually happened to be there and witnessed the whole tragic event. Oh, wow, so what happened exactly? I just had to know, as awful as it was bound to be. Well, your uncle, he had just made a stop at the pharmacy, maybe for some cold medicine or something for depression. It was no secret he wasn't taking his wife's deaths overly well, though he did look a little fluish, too. Ah, made sense. Anyway, after he got his medication, he just started pulling out of his parking spot when none other than Angelica Swenson burst across the lot on her all-chrome pink bicycle. Now, Angelica, she wasn't exactly the nicest little girl in town. Had had a tough upbringing to that point, from my understanding. Anyway, unfortunately, Jedediah's car slammed right into her bike. I let out a gasp. Yep, that was awful, all right. And also, unfortunately, Angelica wasn't wearing a helmet. Little girl always did think she was too good for the rules, or anyone for that matter. His lips puckered a bit as he just shoved a fistful of sour candy into his mouth. Anyway, she immediately flew off her bike and smashed her head into the side of another car driving by. That must have knocked her a bit unconscious, because then she cracked it hard on the pavement, was never able to protect it, not even with her hands. I sucked in a deep breath. Oh, God, that's absolutely terrible. I know. There wasn't much to do for the poor little tyke at that point. She only had a moment to live before she succumbed to both head injuries. Your dear uncle, bless his soul, immediately got out of his car and held her in his arms, until she finally passed on and the ambulance got there. I was the one who called the ambulance, actually. Wow, brutal. This time I couldn't contain a shudder. What about the driver of the other car? I asked. Kept going and never looked back. Filthy, God-for-nothing jerk, whoever they were. Oh, yikes. That was even worse than I thought. Seriously, what a horrific tragedy. But it still didn't explain why Uncle Jed was watching preteen girl TV shows and listening to preteen girl pop groups, or why he broke into Angelica's family's house and stole her beloved teddy bear after she died. Well, unless he felt guilty he accidentally killed her and that was his way of dealing with it, by sort of embodying her in a way and the things she loved after her death. But how could he have possibly known all that stuff about her in the first place? Unless it was broadcast on the news or something after she died. Still, that was pretty freaking weird to do after killing someone, even if it was by accident. Yeah, Mr. Wilson said. It was a real shame, all right, for all parties involved. Anyway, say hi to your uncle for me. Oh, and be sure never to fall asleep anywhere near a country road, or any road ever again. You might be joining the local ghosts that day, if you catch my drift. He winked as he gave a head nod toward the cemetery. Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Mr. Wilson, Paul. Anytime, son. Anytime. And he headed toward the open cemetery gate. I gave my clothes one last look to make sure I dusted off all the dirt that had smudged onto them, then continued the last half-mile to the center of town. No way I was not going to finish my leisurely stroll this gorgeous morning,
even if it had been a little disturbing so far. Before I knew it, I made it there, letting my gaze rove over the small parking lot and short chain of stores. Yep, it looked exactly the same as it always did. I sucked in a big, long breath. It was nice seeing something so familiar. I glanced at the row of parking spots directly in front of the pharmacy part of the grocery store, and couldn't help but wonder which one Uncle Jed had been parked in when he backed out and tragically killed Angelica Swenson. I also couldn't help but notice the large hill jutting up behind the chain of stores, what was clearly a gigantic white house perched at the very top. I had never really noticed it before, but it must have been Angelica's house. Somehow, that made the accident even more tragic, that her home hovered above the very spot she died, gazing down at it as though keeping guard over it forever. I couldn't help but think every time her parents looked out a window on the side of their house facing the town center, they'd be reminded of their daughter's horrific death. Ugh, Jason, put these awful thoughts out of your head, now, please. So I tried my best to as I looked back at the line of stores, including the one on the far end, that weird psychic shop. Madame Fleury, Psychic Advisor. The store label read in bright purple neon font. Below it was a large sign that read in bold black font, Free Consultation and First Session. Below that, on the same sign, was a list of bullet points, but I couldn't make them out from here, so I headed over. Peer into your future. Rediscover your past lives. Talk to deceased loved ones, and much, much more. The third bullet point struck me hard. Talk to deceased loved ones. Yes, maybe I could speak with Mom and Dad. Maybe, just maybe, the psychic could help me contact them from beyond the grave, and I could actually talk with them one more time. And maybe, just maybe, unlike God, they'd actually answer me. Plus, it couldn't hurt. It was a free consultation and first session, after all. I looked up toward the heavens and flattened my hands together in a prayer sign. Please, God. Please let me contact Mom and Dad. I want to hear their voices again one more time. More than anything. I miss them so much, God, and I don't care if that's the last thing I ever get to do in my entire life. I waited a moment again, just in case God gave me some sign he'd actually heard me. And then a loud gunshot rang out. I let out a scream as I dove to the ground, covering my head with both hands. Chapter 19. I lay face down on the ground, my whole body quaking, my heart rapid firing in my chest for what felt like a full minute, but was probably only a second. Was someone shooting at me? Had God sent someone to kill me? Then loud, raucous laughter filled the area, and I opened my eyes as I whipped my hands away from my face. "It was just a car backfiring, kid," said a strong-looking man with a pot belly as he walked past me along the sidewalk. He wore a dirt-smudged white t-shirt, a patch of dark scruff clinging to his chin. I slowly pulled myself to my feet, blood rushing to my face. Yeesh. That was embarrassing. But at least I was alive and nobody else happened to see my foolish reaction. Then again, maybe the car backfire was a sign from God. Maybe it meant he heard me and I would be talking with Mom and Dad again real soon. I looked back up at the sky, made another prayer sign with my hands, and mouthed the words, "Thank you, God." "Hey, loser!" shouted a squeaky, high-pitched voice, and I let out another cry as a gangly, freckle-faced kid about my age with orangish hair purposefully rode within inches of me on his bike. He let out a loud laugh and stuck his tongue out at me as he passed. "Hey, shut it, jerk!" I yelled after him. I know. It wasn't very creative and probably made me look even more of a loser, but I had to say something before the obnoxious kid left the area, which he did by turning at the corner of the chain of stores and disappearing along its side. For the third time, I rubbed my shorts and shirt, dislodging bits of gravel that clung to them. Well, this whole town center trip wasn't turning out to be nearly as fun and therapeutic as I'd hoped, but there was still at least one thing left to do. I ducked inside the psychic shop
and a sweet, pungent aroma immediately hit my nose. My vision slightly clouded by some kind of smoke hanging thickly in the air. A few yards away sat a small table covered in a red velvet tablecloth. On top of it rested what looked to be a white crystal ball, a pack of some kind of cards, 3 large, thick candles that were currently lit, and a brass container that appeared to be burning incense. The candles and incense probably accounted for the smoke and sharp scent. Also at the table sat a woman about as old as Uncle Jed. She wore a red bandana, her long curly brown hair framing the sides of her oval face. "Come in, child, come in, and please take a seat." She gestured to the empty chair across from her. "If you are looking to contact loved ones who are no longer with us, then you have come to the right place." Whoa, spot on. Was this another sign? "How'd you know?" I couldn't help but ask. "Why, I am the great Madame Fleury. I know all that pertains to the past, present, future, the cosmos, the spirit planes of both the living and the dead. And far more than all that, dear child." Oh, cool. Well, it definitely sounded impressive to me. A rueful smile crossed her face, and it suddenly hit me one of her eyes appeared to be larger than the other. Weird. "Plus, you have the pained expression of someone who recently lost someone they hold dear. I know it all too well myself, not just because many clients seek me out to communicate with such people, but because I recently lost one myself." A red tinge crept into her eyes, but before I could say anything, she said, "But please, sit down, sit down." As I did, I couldn't help but notice there was a large metal shelf behind her stacked with more cards, crystal balls, and other strange-looking knickknacks. A large shotgun also rested on it, which made a slight quiver race along my spine. Not that I was overly surprised to see a gun, though. We were pretty far out in the sticks, and lots of people around here owned at least one for self-defense, though Uncle Jed didn't. "So," Madame Fleury said, "why don't you go ahead and tell me the full name of the person you lost, including the middle name if you know it, so as to be as accurate as possible, and then I will do my best to contact them from beyond the grave, free of charge. Oh, and before you do, I must say I rarely fail at this service, as it is one of my absolute specialties." "Okay, cool," I told her both Mom and Dad's full names, explaining that they were among the victims of the plane on the news the other day. "Oh, I'm sorry, child. I didn't even know about that." "Oh, really?" She shook her head, her wispy hair bobbing around her shoulders. "However, I must admit that I am not much of a news watcher. When I wish to learn about what's going on in the world, I prefer to tap into the ethereal astral plane and glean it from there." Oh, right. Like I knew what the heck that was. Then she closed her eyes, held both of her hands high in the air, and pinched her thumbs and forefingers with both hands together. Her lips shifted slightly, as if she was mumbling something, though I couldn't hear anything. "Come on, please find Mom and Dad, Madame Fiore, and please answer her, Mom and Dad. I really need to talk to you again, make sure you're okay, just plain hear your voices." Finally, Madame Fleury opened her eyes and lowered her hands. She bit her bottom lip as she scrunched her eyes together. I'm not getting a read on either of those people. Are you sure you have their names completely accurate, honey?" Yes, definitely. There was no way I got a single part of them wrong. I even included Mom's maiden name just to be on the safe side." Madame Fiore's already wrinkled forehead bunched up even more. "Well, if that's the case, then your parents aren't actually dead. They must be alive, my dear child. Very much alive." "Huh? What? No way. That couldn't possibly be true, could it?" Chapter 20. "No," I said. "That's impossible. Uncle Jed told me they were dead, that they died in that terrible plane crash." Well, unless you got a part of both their names wrong, then that simply can't be the case, child, as I wasn't able to communicate with either of them. And, like I told you, contacting the dead is one of my absolute specialties. Have you tried giving them a call on your cell phone, dear? Well, no. I don't have my cell phone anymore. Or at least not for now. How come? It's a long story, and one I really didn't want to get into right now. I understand, my dear child. Well, why don't you try giving them a call now on my cell phone? Okay, sure. Thanks so much, Madame Fleury. Despite myself, my heart skipped several beats. Please be alive, Mom and Dad. Please be alive. She handed me her phone, and I called Mom. Thankfully, I had her and Dad's numbers memorized in case of emergencies like this. The call went straight to voicemail, though, and my heart plummeted. I then tried Dad, but it also went straight to voicemail. So I left a message asking him and Mom to call me back as soon as possible. Then I gave Madame Fleury back her phone. Mother of all bat crud. After such an intense, all-consuming spark of hope, it felt like I'd just been viciously gutted like a pig. Then something hit me. They might be in some important meeting or something. They're in California on business. Madame Fleury nodded. Say, didn't you say you're staying at your uncle's house? Yeah, right here in town. Uncle Jed. Jedediah Hardwick. She curled an eyebrow at me. Ah, Jedediah. He's made the news around here as of late, all right. From what I understand, his beloved long-time wife, your aunt, recently passed away. I'm terribly sorry to hear about that, by the way, dear child. Oh, thanks. She was an awesome aunt for sure. I'll bet. And there was that unfortunate incident with that bratty little rich girl, Angelica Swenson, who lived in that manor up on the hill. Yeesh. Angelica certainly didn't have a very good reputation around here, did she? Yes, that's right. Poor snobby little wench. Then her eyes lit up, her larger one appearing to swell even more. Say, child, has your uncle been acting strangely as of late? And by that, I mean more than merely expressing grief over your aunt's death. Like, has he been acting almost like an entirely different person to you? Why, yes. Yes, he has. How'd you know? A wry smile crossed her face. Oh, just a hunch. Please tell me, child, how your visit with him has been going so far. The whole spiel. So I did, including the God and losing power part. Aha, she said when I finally finished, her eyes lighting up again. I think I know precisely what is afoot here, my dear child. What? What is it? She couldn't tell me fast enough, though I didn't like the melancholy tone of her voice. Well, to put it quite simply, I'm afraid your dear Uncle Jed has been possessed. What? Possessed? Like in some kind of horror book or movie? That's right. And by none other than the very soul of Angelica Swenson herself. Huh? No way. What in the flaming gates of heck was this crazy woman talking about? You see, my dear child, when people become depressed in life for whatever reason, their soul becomes more fragile than normal, at least for the time being, and the extent of that fragility depends upon the severity of the depression. Oh, okay, I guess that made sense. And it's no secret your Uncle Jed had been going through a fairly severe depression ever since he lost his beloved wife. Would you agree with that, my dear child? Yeah, definitely. And the thing is, right after your dear Uncle Jed tragically struck poor Angelica Swenson with his car, he held her in his arms until she died. At least, I remember hearing that at some point. Yes, he did. Which means, given your uncle's advanced age and incredibly poor mental state at the time, it was all too easy for that bratty little wench Angelica to transition her spirit from her body to his as she was dying, essentially kicking his presently frail soul out of his body in the process. Whoa, that was totally crazy. Who'd have thunk something like that was even possible? I think I see what you're saying, I said. It hasn't been Uncle Jed's soul in his body the past couple weeks. It'd been Angelica Swenson's. Exactly. I let that incredibly disturbing thought settle in. Goosebumps knotting all along my arms and the back of my neck. The cloud of smoke seemed to thicken, partly obscuring Madame Florey's face. This all explained Uncle Jed's obsession with kids for life and prairie girls, too, as well as the teddy bear in his bedroom with Angelica's name on the tag. And it even explained things like Uncle Jed's new fancy pajama robe and huge state-of-the-art TV, with all the latest streaming devices. Angelica had taken over and either stolen or bought all those things with Uncle Jed's money. Which leads me to my other point, dear child. Angelica may be the brattiest of all the little brats in town, but she's certainly no dummy. Plus, she's a very young girl who is now trapped in an elderly man's body that doesn't have nearly as much time left to live as her old vessel did. So? But I was pretty sure I knew exactly where she was going. So, I said, when she found out I was coming to visit, she put together a plan to crush my spirit. You know, make me horribly depressed so she could kick my frail soul out of my body and possess it for the rest of my vessel's life? Madame Florey nodded, her gaze going ice cold. That's precisely correct, my dear child. That's what she's been trying to do all along. Chapter 21. Wow, so diabolical, so evil, and so selfish. Angelica's death may have been a tragic accident, but then to try to possess me and take over my life? Somebody she didn't even know? Somebody who didn't even have a single thing to do with her death? That was just plain wrong. I felt like blabbing that out loud to Madame Florey, but her lowered eyebrows and overly wrinkled forehead revealed how much she despised that so-called little wench, too. Now that I thought about it, all this also explained that odd force that had been trying to break into my very soul every night at Uncle Jed's house. Only now I knew that that was exactly what it was trying to do, and that it was Angelica's spirit. I could just see her now in Uncle Jed's body, hovering over my bed while I slept, perhaps holding my hand like Aunt Eleanor did in my nightmare by the cemetery, struggling to transition her soul from his body to mine, kicking my spirit out of mine in the process. That girl wasn't a little brat, she was pure evil, a demon even. But, Madame Fiore said, as it so happens, you are in luck, dear child, as another one of my absolute specialties is expelling spirits from this world. I had the feeling she had a lot of absolute specialties, particularly little snobby evil ones like Angelica's that are unwilling to go when they're supposed to. And I'm so good at it, I don't even need to be in the same room as the spirit. I can do it right from here. Wow, that's absolutely amazing, Madame Florey. Could you please give it a try? Please? If you don't mind, of course. Then something she said struck me. Wait, there are spirits or souls out there who actually want to leave? Oh, absolutely, dear child. In fact, most spirits in this existential plane do. Many haunted houses and locations are merely occupied by souls that are unaware their physical vessels have perished, and so are also unaware it is their time to exit the plane. Many of them just need a little coaxing to leave, as I like to put it. Oh, wow. I definitely didn't know that. Heck, I pretty much didn't know any of this stuff. It was a good thing I visited Madame Florey's shop when I did. In any case, allow me to physically reach out to Angelica Swenson, much like I just tried to do with your parents, and convince her to leave this plane, free of charge as well. We'll just make this all part of your first session. How does that sound, dear child? Great. Not that I really cared about the money all that much. I just needed that bratty little wench gone. If I had to, I'd find a way to pay Madame Florrie. And then you, and everybody else in this world for that matter, will never have to deal with the likes of that bratty little snob ever again for as long as you shall live. At least in this lifetime, anyway. She winked as she curled a half-smile at me. And hopefully that will be a long time. Yes, definitely. And thanks so much, Madame Florrie. I can't even begin to tell you how much this means to me. You're very welcome, dear child. She closed her eyes, and her lips started to shift again, as if she were talking or mumbling to someone. Come on, Madame Florrie, you can do it. You can coax Angelica to leave this plane. I know you can. She doesn't belong here anymore, and she doesn't deserve to be here either, after what she's done. And she sure as heck doesn't deserve to take my body and life from me. Suddenly, Madame Florie's lips stopped shifting, and her eyelids quivered. Madame Florrie? No response. Madame Florrie? Then her eyes flew open, and her gaze settled on me. You, she hissed, pointing a long, crooked, trembling finger at me. You ruined everything. Madame Florrie? Your uncle killed me, she screamed. He took my life, so I deserve to have yours in return, you stupid, horror-loving boy. Even if it is an icky boy's body, he owes me that. Holy of all bad crud, it was Angelica. Somehow, someway, Angelica Swenson was possessing Madame Florrie. So, let me take over your body, she said. Let me have your life. Now, Jason Anthony Hardwick. Whoa, she even knew my full name somehow. Maybe through Uncle Jed or when she was actually penetrating my soul. I finally found a way to speak without stuttering. No, Angelica, no way. That's not fair at all, and you know it. Of course it's fair. It's the fairest thing in, the history of ever. Now hand your body over to me. Now. But I just shook my head. Never in a million years. This is my body, and it's my life. For a brief moment, we just stared at each other, as though trying to get the other to do what each wanted through sheer will alone. Ah, she cried. You stupid, stupid boy. You ruined it. You ruined everything. I guess that was true in a way. Now that I was no longer depressed and I knew all about Angelica's evil scheme, there was no way she could possess me now. She quickly glanced around the room, including behind her, then snagged the shotgun from the metal shelf. My heart lurched into my chest. Holy mother of... She isn't going to... So, she said, now you must leave this existential plane forever. She pointed the shotgun right at me. Chapter 22. I gasped as I instinctively slid off my chair. I hit the floor hard just as a deafening noise rang out in the small store, causing my ears to ring. Things clattered all around me, probably stuff that had been on the top of the table, but now I was horrendously stuck. Where could I possibly go? Madame Florrie dashed around the table and aimed the shotgun at me again. They say your life flashes before your eyes right before you die, but for me, not a single teensy-weensy thing did. Maybe that was because I wasn't meant to die just then. Or maybe it was because my brain was totally fuzzed from the utter shock and horror of everything that was happening. Either way, Madame Florrie's eyes closed, her eyelids quivered again, and then they popped open again. "Run!" she screamed. She wildly gestured with her head toward the store's front door, then made a motion that looked as though she was trying to toss the gun off to the side. But in the middle of the motion, her eyes closed and flickered again, and the gun smashed partly through the wall, both her hands still on it. Bits of wallpaper and white plaster drifted to the ground. Holy crud, it was Angelica again. As she wrenched the gun back out of the wall, more pieces of wallpaper and plaster sailing everywhere. I jumped to my feet and kicked the shotgun. It popped up out of her grasp and ricocheted off the wall, clattering to the ground a few feet away. I didn't dare scramble for it, though. Madame Florrie, or really Angelica, was right next to me. I'd be way too vulnerable if I bent over. So I kicked her right in the stomach. It was the only thing I could think to do, even though part of me felt awful as it was really Madame Florrie's body. A loud crunch rang out. I think I broke a couple of poor woman's ribs. She let out a horrible, withering moan as she doubled over. She flattened her hands on the ground, looking downward, her long, wispy hair hanging all around her head, obscuring her face. I froze again as a light sobbing filled the room. It sounded so sad and pitiful, I couldn't even jar my feet into action to grab the shotgun or get the heck out of the store. "She's gone. She's finally gone," Madame Florrie moaned. "The poor little girl. So much pain, so much anguish. I could just feel it. And I suddenly knew everything. Her parents, they're filthy rich, but they were always too busy with their work and hobbies to give her the attention she needed and deserved. Plus, she never had any true friends. Nobody liked her because she was so snobby, because she was so much better than everyone else." She looked up, her eyes dim pools, her wrinkly cheeks streaked with tears seeming to cut even deeper grooves in them. But she didn't really think she was better than everyone else. It was just a defense mechanism. Because nobody loved or cared for her at home, she didn't know how to love or care for anybody herself. And then that horrific tragedy outside the pharmacy took away any chance she'd ever have of finally making any friends, of finally having a much better life forever. She slowly, shakily climbed to her feet, keeping her tear-stained gaze upon me. But then something else happened. Something truly miraculous. God gave her a second chance. He gave her the chance to possess the body of someone her own age, someone young like her, with the whole rest of his life ahead of him. That way, she could at least give life one last good shot. And that 12-year-old boy, the one the good Lord chose for the purpose, was none other than Jason Anthony Hardwick. Her face morphed into the ugliest scowl I'd ever seen, all the blood draining from it. But that boy totally disobeyed her and God and ruined everything. And with that, she grabbed the large crystal ball from the table with both hands and threw it at me with what seemed like all her might. Still registering what she was saying and shocked by the sudden motion, I couldn't react in time. I let out a scream as the ball crashed into my stomach, ripping the wind right out of me. I crumpled to the ground on my back, the ball clattering beside me. Holy bat crud! Angelica's spirit must have taken over again. She must have been faking ever since I kicked her in the stomach. I desperately struggled to suck in breath, much less move, as Madame Florrie picked up the shotgun and trained it on me for the third time. "Goodbye, Jason Hardwick. Unfortunately, I really can't say it's been a pledge." And then an idea hit me. Wait, I'll be your friend. She froze, totally silent, still training the gun on me. Now it was her lips that quivered, and I could have sworn I saw the little 12-year-old girl inside her. Could have sworn I saw the shadow of her small figure, complete with pigtails and pink ribbon on her head, hovering against Madame Florrie's body, like some kind of ghost or something. Maybe, in a way, she was one. "I swear," I said, "I'll be your friend. Your very best friend, forever. We'll always be together, you'll see. And I'm extremely loyal, too. Go ahead, ask any of my friends. They'll tell you straight out." Not that I had any intention of ever being friends with Angelica. I was just trying anything I possibly could to get out of this terrifying, life-threatening situation.
Another short silence wafted through the room. "Come on, Angelica. Please don't kill me. Please don't kill me. Please agree to be my friend." Then she gritted her teeth as if she were a rabid animal, and my gut slid out of my body. "Your friends. Your friends. You get to have more than one friend, while I never even got a single one my entire life. Oh, that's so unfair." "But to be fair, you are only 12 years old. I mean, there's still loads of time to—" But she cocked the gun at me again. I let out a piercing scream and scrunched my eyes shut. Chapter 23. I kept my eyes scrunched shut, nothing but blackness consuming my vision. Was it over? Was I dead now? I hadn't heard another deafening noise that made my ears ring extremely painfully. Did that mean? I opened my eyes and took in Madame Florie's body. Her legs were splayed out on the floor, her back and head leaning against the wall, her eyes closed. A large, dark purple bruise pushed out from the middle of her forehead, the shotgun lying beside her on the ground. She knocked herself out. Madame Florrie must have regained control and slammed herself in the head with the shotgun and knocked herself out, so Angelica couldn't regain control herself and try to kill me. I whipped my gaze away from the gut-wrenching sight, but the fact of the matter was, Madame Florrie was a hero, a real, true hero in every sense of the word. A sob yanked itself from my throat as a policeman and policewoman barged into the store, black handguns raised. "What's going on in here?" the woman called.
"What happened?"
the man asked. All I could do was point toward Madame Florie's limp body with a quivering finger, still looking at the cops. She knocked herself unconscious with a shotgun. Then I started crying uncontrollably. The policeman gingerly helped me to my feet as the woman gently prodded Madame Florrie, but she didn't wake up. I hoped she'd be okay, and that Angelica would be gone from this existential plane forever when Madame Florrie finally came to. No, prayed with every last speck of my being. Thankfully by now I'd gotten my wind back, and the pain from the crystal ball hitting my stomach had subsided a ton too. The policewoman kept trying to wake Madame Florrie to no avail, and eventually the ambulance came and retrieved her unconscious body. Then the cops taped off the scene and brought me to the station for questioning. As incredibly bizarre as the story was, I told them the whole thing, nothing but the truth, starting from the very beginning when Mom and Dad dropped me off at Uncle Jed's house. They nodded along as I explained, jotting stuff down on notepads, but didn't interrupt or show any signs that they didn't believe any parts of the story. Either way, I wasn't too worried they'd convict me of assaulting Madame Florrie or anything crazy like that. After all, they had no evidence I was the one who struck her, and obviously they wouldn't find anything. I never even laid my hands on the shotgun, so it didn't have any of my fingerprints on it. As soon as the officers finished their questioning, a third one popped into the interrogation room. He looked to be a man in his mid-30s with a swirl of blonde hair on his head and a name tag that read, Officer Davis.
"I just received word that Madame Florrie has regained consciousness in the hospital," he said, "and thankfully she's completely fine. No permanent damage at all according to the doctors."
"Oh, that's so great to hear," I said. "Seriously, thank God." Heat swelled through me, making me as warm as a toaster tart really should be.
"Tell me about it," Officer Davis said. "Also, she's on line 3. She wants to speak with you, Jason, if that's all right with you, of course."
"Oh, yes, definitely. I had a couple of things I'd like to say to her as well." Officer Davis left the room, and the one sitting across from me at the cold metal table, Officer Hillbanks, handed me the phone. I shoved the cool piece of plastic to my ear. "Hello, Madame Florrie?"
"Oh, dear child, it's so excellent to hear your voice," she said, her own much frailer than before.
"Same here, and I'm so incredibly glad you're alive and okay. You have no idea."
"Oh, thank you so much, child. I'm glad to hear you're as fit as a fiddle as well. Anyway, I just wanted to call and say I'm happy to report Angelica Swenson is no longer in this existential plane. I admit I may be a bit feeble at the moment, but I couldn't detect her spirit anywhere, and I tried several times. Everyone, including you and I, is finally free of her horrific brattiness and cruelness forever, at least in this particular plane. She let out a hoarse laugh that quickly turned into a rough cough. Clearly she had some recovering to do, and I laughed too. Awesome, Madame Fleury, I said. Just so awesome. Also, I wanted to thank you so much for saving my life. I really owe you one, or really more than I could ever possibly repay you in all my lives, past, present, and future combined. I couldn't stop a chuckle from squirting loose. I was just so giddy she was alive and okay. Oh, any time, dear child, any time. In fact, you might say saving young, sweet boys from bratty, evil girls is one of my absolute specialties as well. I could hear the smile in her voice, and I couldn't help but smile myself. Yep, definitely Madame Fleury, no doubt about it. I told her I'd come visit her shop again real soon when she was all better, and that we both said goodbye and hung up. That was nice, kid, Officer Hillbanks said. Yeah, said the policewoman, whose name was Officer Shirley. It was. Officer Hillbanks then offered to drive me back up to Uncle Jed's house, so I took him up on it. On the way, I wondered what I would find when I got there. Would Uncle Jed be lying down, either on the living room couch or the wooden floor somewhere, dead? After all, Angelica's spirit had kicked his extremely depressed one out of his body weeks ago. When Officer Hillbanks turned the cop car into Uncle Jed's gravelly driveway and pulled it to a stop in front of the house, I said, "You may want to come in and check on my Uncle Jed." He chuckled. "I'm sure your uncle's fine, kid. Say hello to the old trooper for me." Guessed he didn't think too much of what I said at the police station, or at least not all of it. No, really, could you please come in and check for me, just to be on the safe side? I have the feeling he's, no longer with us. Officer Hillbanks shook his head. Sorry, kid, no can do. I've got a ton of important things to tend to this afternoon, but really, I think your uncle's totally fine. Why don't you go in and tell him all about your exciting day?" He let out a louder chuckle this time and motioned toward the passenger side door. I could tell I wasn't going to get anywhere with him, so I said, "All right. Thanks for the ride, sir." "You got it, kid." As soon as I got out of the car, it pulled out of the driveway faster than the skin off an overripe banana. But no sooner had it gone than Mom and Dad's big black Buick coasted right on in. I had absolutely zero chance of containing my excitement. I jumped up and down in front of the front porch, waving my arms in the air like some kind of deranged orangutan. This was easily the best day of my life. Even after all the crazy, horrific stuff I'd been through, Mom and Dad were finally back from their trip, and they were picking me up. But most importantly of all, they were alive. The Buick stopped right in front of me, and the passenger side window lowered a tad. Oh, thank God! Mom's face looked paler than usual, her forehead extra crinkly. Same with Dad's. "What?" I asked. "What's wrong?" They exchanged a glance. "Well," Mom said, "your father and I were a little worried about you. When we tried to check up on you the last few days, we, got a couple of strange texts back." "Texts that didn't quite sound like you," Dad said. "Right," Mom said. "And when we texted Uncle Jed and asked how you were doing, even though he said you were fine, he didn't quite seem like himself either." "We both spoke to him a couple times over the phone," Dad said. "But something just seemed off, so we decided to come back early." Right, that made sense. And it did explain why Mom and Dad were back a few days ahead of schedule. "Luckily, we got all of our big meetings out of the way," Dad said. "So it wasn't a huge deal cutting out early." "And most importantly of all," Mom said, "it looks like you're totally fine." Yeah, definitely. I wanted to add I am now, but barely held back. "Did you guys get my voicemail? The one I left Dad?" "Oh no." Dad quickly glanced at his phone. "Looks like the thing's still on airplane mode." I think mine is too, honey. Mom didn't even bother to look at hers. We must have forgotten to switch them off. Oh, okay, I said. You can just delete the voicemail then. Everything's completely fine like you said. Well, except... What? Dad curled an eyebrow at me as Mom scrunched her lips. Well, you see, the thing is, Uncle Jed... The front door creaked open, and Uncle Jed strode out, wheeling my suitcase along with him. "Hey there, Joseph and Ann!" he called from the porch. "Great to see you guys! What gorgeous weather we've been having lately, eh?" Chapter 24. "Yes," Dad said as Mom said. "Absolutely gorgeous." All I could do was stare at Uncle Jed. "I took the liberty of packing for you," he told me. "Don't worry, I'm pretty sure I got everything, including that new horror book you had on your nightstand. Looks like a good one, too. I'll have to pick up a copy myself sometime real soon. Lord knows I could have a little more horror fiction in my life." He winked at me. "Oh, and here's your cell phone. Found it wedged between the cushions of the living room couch. Must have slipped out of your pocket while you were watching TV or something." He winked again as he handed me my phone, and I numbly put it into my pocket, still processing what was going on right now. Then he said to Mom and Dad, "If you don't mind, there's something I'd like to tell Jason man to man." Dad quirked an eyebrow. "Oh, okay." "Yeah, sure," Mom said. "Go ahead." Uncle Jed stepped closer to me on the porch and said so low only I could hear, "Don't worry. Angelica hadn't been able to totally kick me out of my body. So for the last few weeks, I'd sort of been trapped in here, so to speak. Too frail to kick her out or take my body back over. That is, until, well, you know." "Oh, I see," I whispered back. "That must have been a pretty freaking awful experience, like being a prisoner in your own body. Thank God Uncle Jed was able to reclaim both it and his life, though. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to be much better from now on, too. Grief takes its toll and takes its time, but now that I've been given a second lease on life, I'll be that same Uncle Jed you've always known and loved. I promise you, with all my heart, Jason Anthony Hardwick, stick a needle in it and hope to die." My eyes started to blur, and I blinked away the tears. There was nothing I wanted to hear more than that right now. "That's so incredibly awesome, Uncle Jed, and it's so great to see you again." I enveloped him in an enormous, bone-crunching hug, and he hugged back real hard, too, like two beetles trying to break each other's shells. "You too, Jason." When we pulled away, I could barely hear Mom murmur, "Aww," from the Buick. I gripped my suitcase by the handle and hauled it to the trunk, which Dad popped open. "Well," Dad said, "I wish we could stay and chat, but Ann and I are looking to get home and veg out for a while. Even though our trip ended early, we're incredibly, you might even say ungodly, tired." Uncle Jed chuckled. "Can't blame you there, Joseph. You all have a safe ride back now, and enjoy the rest of the week as well. I hear it's supposed to be terrific weather all the way." "Oh, thank God." "You too, Jedediah," Dad said as I closed the trunk and slid into the back seat. I lowered the window a tad as Dad started to pull the Buick out of the driveway. "Goodbye, Uncle Jed," I shouted as I waved back at him. "Goodbye, Jason," he yelled. "See you next year, old boy." My whole body froze as the Buick passed the cross sticking out of the earth midway along the driveway and stayed frozen as it drove down the narrow country road all the way back to our house in Norton, Minnesota. "Old boy,"